Long before Harry Potter ever stepped onto platform 9 3/4, another life was already weaving quietly through the history of the wizarding world. It belonged to Peter Pettigrew, a wizard who began as an unremarkable boy at Hogwarts, but would eventually stand at the center of events that changed magical history forever. His story moves through friendship, fear, war, and betrayal, touching some of the most familiar moments in the wizarding world from an entirely different angle. Tonight, we will slowly follow that path, beginning with the world he was born into and tracing the choices that shaped the life of a man remembered not for courage, but for survival. Several years before Peter Pettigrew was born, the wizarding world was already beginning to change in ways that few people fully understood. For most witches and wizards living in Britain during the middle of the 20th century, magical society appeared stable on the surface. The Ministry of Magic governed the community with familiar institutions. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry continued educating young witches and wizards as it had for centuries, and the Statute of Secrecy kept the magical and non-magical worlds carefully separated. To many families, life seemed predictable. Children would grow up, receive their Hogwarts letters at the age of 11, and eventually find their place somewhere within the magical community. Yet beneath that sense of stability, tensions had already begun to grow. The wizarding world had long contained divisions about blood status. Some families believed strongly in the importance of pure magical ancestry. Others had come to accept that magical ability could appear in people born to non-magical parents. Hogwarts itself had always welcomed students from every background, but outside the castle walls, the debate never truly disappeared. In private conversations and old family traditions, certain wizarding households still spoke of pure blood lineage as something that must be protected. These ideas were not new. They had existed for generations, lingering quietly in parts of wizarding society. But during the years leading up to the 1960s, those beliefs began to gather momentum once again. One of the central figures behind that change was a wizard whose name would eventually become known throughout the magical world with fear and reluctance. Tom Riddle, later known as Lord Voldemort, had once been a student at Hogwarts himself. During his school years, he had already displayed remarkable magical talent and a carefully controlled charm that allowed him to gather followers around him. Even as a young man, he spoke about power, purity, and the idea that witches and wizards should rule over a world they believed was rightfully theirs. After leaving Hogwarts, Tom Riddle slowly began to disappear from the public eye. For a time, few people knew where he had gone or what he was doing. But rumors spread that he had traveled far beyond Britain, studying obscure branches of magic and searching for ancient knowledge. When he eventually returned, he was no longer simply Tom Riddle. He had begun using a new name, one that would soon become infamous: Lord Voldemort. At first, the changes he brought to the wizarding world were subtle. He did not immediately declare open war against the Ministry of Magic. Instead, he began gathering followers. These followers would later be known as Death Eaters, witches, and wizards, who believed in his vision of a world dominated by pure-blood, magical families. Some were drawn to him by ideology. Others were impressed by his power, and many were simply afraid to stand against him. During these early years, Voldemort moved carefully. He operated in secrecy, building a network of supporters while avoiding direct confrontation with the authorities. His followers carried out acts that caused fear to spread through the magical community. Certain families disappeared. Others were attacked in their homes. The victims were often those who openly supported cooperation between magical and non-magical society. The Ministry of Magic initially struggled to understand what was happening. Officials knew that dark magic was becoming more common, but the structure of Voldemort's growing organization remained hidden. His followers concealed their identities behind masks and robes, allowing them to operate without immediate consequence. At the same time, everyday life in the wizarding world continued. Children still boarded the Hogwarts Express each September. Shopkeepers in Diagon Alley sold wands, robes, and cauldrons, as they always had. Students learned charms and transfiguration in classrooms that had stood for centuries. For many families, the distant rumors of dark wizards seemed like something happening far away, something that might never reach their own homes. But the sense of unease slowly began to grow. Certain names were whispered more cautiously than before. Parents warned their children not to wander alone in certain areas. Even experienced witches and wizards began to pay closer attention to the signs of dark magic appearing in different parts of the country. Within the ministry, a few individuals realized that the threat was becoming more serious. Among them was Albus Dumbledore, already widely respected as one of the most powerful and thoughtful wizards of his time. Dumbledore had known Tom Riddle during his years at Hogwarts and understood better than most people the danger he posed. As Voldemort's influence continued to expand, Dumbledore began quietly preparing for the possibility that open conflict might one day become unavoidable. It was into this gradually darkening world that Peter Pettigrew would eventually be born. For young witches and wizards growing up during this period, the tensions surrounding Voldemort's rise often remained distant and unclear. Children rarely understood the full scale of the changes taking place around them. They heard fragments of adult conversations, perhaps noticing the worried tone in their parents' voices when certain topics were mentioned. But for the most part, their lives still revolved around ordinary magical childhood experiences. They practiced simple spells for the first time, learned about magical creatures, and imagined what their future years at Hogwarts might be like. The larger struggles unfolding in the wizarding world seemed abstract, something belonging to the world of adults rather than to them. Yet history was already beginning to move. By the time Peter Pettigrew would reach the age required to attend Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, the wizarding world would be drifting closer to open conflict. The friendships formed inside the castle walls during those years would eventually become deeply entangled with the events of the coming war. And among those friendships would be one small, nervous boy who often found himself standing beside far more confident companions, watching a world grow steadily more dangerous around him. Peter Pettigrew was born into this changing wizarding world around the year 1960, at a time when most families still hoped that the tensions surrounding dark magic might fade away. Very little is recorded about his early childhood, and the details of his family life remain largely unknown. Unlike some of the more famous witches and wizards of his generation, Peter Pettigrew did not come from a widely recognized magical lineage, nor did he grow up surrounded by stories of legendary ancestors. His background appears to have been relatively ordinary, the kind that rarely attracts attention within the broader wizarding community. What can be understood from the fragments of information that remain is that Peter was raised in a household that was at least moderately connected to wizarding society. Like many magical children, he would have grown up aware of the hidden world that existed alongside the non-magical one. Spells, magical creatures, enchanted objects, and the traditions of wizarding culture would all have been part of the environment in which he learned about the world. For children born into wizarding families, magic was something that appeared gradually during early childhood. Small and uncontrolled bursts of accidental magic were often the first signs. A toy might suddenly move across a room, a door might slam without being touched, a frightened child might find themselves in a different place entirely after trying to escape a stressful situation. These incidents were usually the first confirmation that a young witch or wizard possessed magical ability. Peter Pettigrew almost certainly experienced these moments as well. Though the specific events were never recorded, it would have been unusual for a magical child to reach school age without some form of accidental magic revealing itself. For parents in the wizarding world, these moments were often met with encouragement and reassurance rather than concern. They served as reminders that the child would one day attend Hogwarts and begin formal magical training. The expectation of Hogwarts shaped much of a magical child's early life. Even before receiving the official acceptance letter, children were usually familiar with the school through family stories and traditions. Parents spoke about the houses, the professors, and the enchanted castle that stood hidden among the mountains of Scotland. Older siblings returned home during holidays with tales of moving staircases, magical lessons, and strange creatures that roamed the grounds. For Peter, these stories would have formed the first image of the wider wizarding world beyond his home. Hogwarts represented a place where young witches and wizards discovered who they truly were. It was where friendships formed, rivalries began, and talents revealed themselves. Yet even in these early years, certain aspects of Peter's personality may already have been beginning to take shape. Later accounts from those who knew him during his school years often describe him as timid, eager to please, and deeply uncomfortable when placed in situations where he stood alone. Unlike students who naturally attracted attention through confidence or skill, Peter seemed to prefer the safety of stronger personalities around him. He watched others carefully, often aligning himself with those who appeared more capable or more popular. This tendency was not necessarily unusual among young students. Many children entering Hogwarts felt uncertain about their abilities, especially during their first years. But in Peter's case, the pattern would become more pronounced as time went on. Rather than seeking independence, he seemed to find comfort in attaching himself to people he admired or feared. At the same time, the wizarding world around him continued to grow more complicated. As Peter grew older, the presence of Voldemort and his followers became more widely discussed within magical society. While children were often shielded from the most frightening details, the growing sense of danger could still be felt. Adults spoke more cautiously about certain topics. News from the ministry occasionally hinted at troubling developments involving dark magic. For a young boy like Peter, these distant events may have felt both confusing and unsettling. The magical world he was preparing to enter was beginning to show signs of conflict, though few people yet understood how severe that conflict would eventually become. Despite these uncertainties, the most important moment of Peter Pettigrew's childhood would arrive just as it had for generations of witches and wizards before him. Shortly after his 11th birthday, an owl would have appeared carrying a letter sealed with a distinctive red crest. The envelope would have been addressed in precise green ink, informing him that he had been accepted into Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. For magical children, that letter represented the beginning of everything. It meant leaving home for the first time and stepping into a world that until then had existed only in stories and imagination. It meant boarding the Hogwarts Express at platform 9 3/4, traveling north through the countryside toward a castle filled with ancient magic. For Peter Pettigrew, it also meant the beginning of friendships that would shape the course of his entire life. Within the walls of Hogwarts, he would soon meet 3 other students whose names would later become inseparable from his own. James Potter, Sirius Black, and Remus Lupin would form the center of a group that became known throughout the school for its mischief, intelligence, and daring. At the time, however, none of them could have known how deeply their lives would eventually intertwine. They were simply children arriving at Hogwarts for the first time, stepping into a new world filled with possibilities, unaware that the friendships forming in those early days would one day influence the fate of the wizarding world itself. The journey to Hogwarts began, as it did for every young witch and wizard in Britain, at King's Cross Station in London. For Peter Pettigrew, the moment must have carried a mixture of excitement and nervous uncertainty. The barrier between platforms 9 and 10 concealed the entrance to another world entirely, and stepping through it for the first time marked the beginning of a life that would soon become far more complicated than he could have imagined. Beyond the barrier stood the Hogwarts Express, a deep red train already filling with students. Families said their goodbyes along the platform, while owls rustled in their cages and trunks were lifted into the luggage compartments. For new students, the atmosphere often felt overwhelming. Everything seemed louder and more crowded than expected, filled with unfamiliar faces and the anticipation of the years ahead. Peter boarded the train alongside dozens of other first-year students. Many of them would have been just as uncertain as he was, though some carried themselves with far more confidence. Conversations began in the compartments as students introduced themselves and speculated about which house they might be sorted into. Among the many children beginning that journey were 3 boys who would soon become central figures in Peter's life. James Potter was one of them. Even at a young age, James possessed a natural confidence that drew attention from others around him. He spoke easily, laughed often, and seemed entirely comfortable in a situation that made many other students anxious. Sitting nearby was Sirius Black, whose background in one of the oldest pure-blood families in Britain might have suggested a quiet and traditional personality. Instead, Sirius carried himself with a sharp independence and a clear willingness to challenge expectations. Remus Lupin was different from both of them. Quiet and thoughtful, he often observed more than he spoke. His calm manner concealed a secret that would shape his time at Hogwarts in ways the others could not yet understand. It was within this group that Peter Pettigrew would eventually find his place. At first, however, they were simply students sharing the same train journey north. The Hogwarts Express traveled through the countryside for several hours, giving new students time to talk, exchange stories about their magical upbringing, and wonder what the castle itself might be like. For Peter, the experience may have been both exciting and intimidating. The other boys, who would later become his closest companions, already showed signs of strong personalities. James and Sirius in particular seemed confident in a way Peter was not. Their easy humor and willingness to joke about the unknown suggested a comfort with uncertainty that Peter may have struggled to match. Yet it was often in situations like this that friendships began to form. By the time the train finally slowed as it approached the small village of Hogsmeade, many of the first-year students had already begun recognizing the faces they would see in classrooms for years to come. The evening air was cool as they stepped down from the train and followed the large figure of Rubeus Hagrid toward the boats waiting beside the lake. For generations, first-year students had crossed the lake by boat in small groups, approaching Hogwarts from the water. The journey allowed them to see the castle revealed slowly against the night sky. Towers rose above the shoreline, windows glowing with warm light. To most students, it was their first glimpse of the place that would soon become their home. Peter would have seen the castle the same way the others did, its enormous structure reflected in the dark water as the boats moved quietly toward the shore. The scale of the building alone could make even the most confident student pause. After climbing the stone steps leading to the entrance hall, the first-year students were gathered together to wait for the sorting ceremony. Professor Minerva McGonagall soon appeared, welcoming them to Hogwarts and explaining the importance of the houses they would soon join. Each student would be sorted into one of 4 houses: Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, or Slytherin. The decision would be made by the Sorting Hat, an ancient magical artifact capable of reading a student's thoughts and potential. The ceremony itself took place in the Great Hall, where hundreds of older students were already seated at long tables beneath floating candles. For a new student, the sight could be overwhelming. The enchanted ceiling reflected the night sky above, and the quiet anticipation of the room filled the air. One by one, the new students were called forward. James Potter was sorted into Gryffindor, a house known for bravery and boldness. Sirius Black followed, to the visible shock of some who knew his family's long history with Slytherin. Instead of continuing that tradition, Sirius was also placed in Gryffindor. Remus Lupin joined them there shortly afterward. When Peter Pettigrew's name was called, he stepped forward to sit beneath the sorting hat like the others before him. The hat considered the qualities within each student carefully, weighing personality traits and potential before announcing its decision. In Peter's case, the result was the same as the friends he had begun to form on the train. Gryffindor, the house of courage and daring. For many observers, the placement might have seemed surprising in hindsight. Peter was not known for boldness or reckless bravery, but the Sorting Hat was famous for recognizing possibilities within students that others could not yet see. With the sorting complete, the first-year students took their seats at their new house tables. Food appeared along the tables almost instantly as the welcoming feast began. Conversations filled the hall as older students greeted the newcomers and the excitement of the first night settled in. For Peter Pettigrew, that evening marked the beginning of his life as a Hogwarts student. It also marked the beginning of friendships that would soon become legendary within the castle walls. James Potter, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew would grow closer over the coming years, forming a group whose adventures and mischief would earn them a reputation throughout the school. At that moment, however, they were simply 4 young students beginning their first night at Hogwarts, unaware that the bond forming between them would one day influence events far beyond the castle grounds. Life at Hogwarts settled quickly into a rhythm that generations of students had followed before them. The days were filled with lessons in charms, transfiguration, and potions, while evenings brought study sessions in the common rooms or quiet walks through the castle corridors. For first-year students, every part of the school seemed mysterious and exciting. Staircases moved when no one expected them to. Portraits spoke from the walls. Even the ceilings could show the sky outside. Within this environment, friendships formed naturally. James Potter and Sirius Black quickly developed a reputation among their classmates. Both were clever, confident, and willing to bend school rules when it suited them. Their humor and energy attracted attention almost immediately. They enjoyed testing boundaries, exploring the hidden corners of the castle, and inventing elaborate jokes that often left professors frustrated and other students amused. Remus Lupin, while quieter, soon became closely connected with them as well. Lupin was thoughtful and intelligent, often approaching schoolwork with a seriousness that balanced the reckless tendencies of his friends. Though he rarely sought attention, his calm presence made him a steady influence within the group. Peter Pettigrew found himself drawn toward these 3 almost from the beginning. Where James and Sirius displayed confidence, Peter often showed hesitation. He watched conversations carefully before speaking, sometimes laughing along with the others, but rarely leading the moment himself. Yet he clearly admired the boldness of the boys he had befriended. Being near them seemed to give him a sense of belonging that he might not have found elsewhere. At Hogwarts, personality differences often shaped the friendships that developed between students. Some groups formed around shared interests in specific subjects. Others gathered around common goals in sports or academic competitions. The connection between James, Sirius, Remus, and Peter seemed to form around something simpler. They enjoyed each other's company. During their early years at Hogwarts, the 4 boys began spending more and more time together. They studied in the Gryffindor common room, shared meals in the Great Hall, and wandered the castle during their free hours, discussing everything from school gossip to the strange, magical phenomena they encountered in their lessons. It did not take long before their group developed a reputation. James and Sirius, in particular, were already known for their willingness to challenge authority. They treated school rules as obstacles to be explored, rather than limits to obey. When they discovered hidden passageways or clever ways to avoid supervision, they often shared those discoveries with the others. Peter rarely suggested these adventures himself, but he followed along eagerly. Being included in the group meant sharing in experiences that made Hogwarts feel even larger and more exciting. Over time, their friendship became strong enough that other students began referring to them collectively. The name that would eventually become famous within Hogwarts history came later, but the foundation of that identity was already forming. Together, they represented a blend of personalities that somehow worked despite their differences. James was the natural leader, confident and charismatic. Sirius was rebellious and fiercely independent, often the first to challenge expectations. Remus provided quiet intelligence and careful thought, understanding the consequences of their actions even when the others did not. And Peter remained close beside them, often looking to the others for guidance but clearly devoted to the group. During these early years, the boys also began to develop an interest in magical skills beyond their school lessons. Hogwarts offered countless opportunities for curious students to experiment with magic. Books in the library described spells that went far beyond the basic charms taught in class, and older students often spoke about complex enchantments that required patience and creativity. James and Sirius in particular enjoyed testing the limits of their abilities, whether it involved inventing small pranks or learning spells not assigned by their professors. They approached magic with enthusiasm. Peter watched these efforts closely. Though he was not known for exceptional magical talent, he seemed fascinated by the abilities displayed by his friends. When they practiced spells or discussed magical theory, Peter listened carefully, often asking questions and trying to follow their reasoning. In many ways, the group functioned as a small world of its own within Hogwarts. They shared secrets, defended each other during arguments with other students, and developed traditions that strengthened their bond. Late-night conversations in the common room often lasted long after the castle had grown quiet, with the four boys discussing their ambitions for the future or speculating about mysteries hidden within the school. At the same time, Hogwarts itself continued to shape their experiences. Classes grew more difficult as the years passed. Professors expected greater discipline and more advanced magical control. Students were encouraged to discover their strengths, whether through academic achievement, magical research, or participation in school activities like Quidditch. James Potter quickly became known for his skill in Quidditch, eventually earning a position on the Gryffindor team as a chaser. His athletic ability added to his reputation, making him one of the more recognizable students in the school. Sirius matched him in confidence and daring, often joining James in various schemes that amused their classmates and frustrated their professors. Remus Lupin maintained a quieter profile, focusing on his studies while remaining deeply loyal to his friends. Peter Pettigrew continued to move within their circle, often appearing slightly behind the others but always close enough to be part of their shared identity. As the years passed, the four boys became increasingly inseparable. Their personalities remained distinct, yet their loyalty to one another seemed genuine. Students who knew them during this period would later remember the group as energetic, mischievous, and unusually close. They moved through the corridors together, laughed loudly in the common room, and approached the challenges of Hogwarts life with a sense of adventure. What none of them could yet fully understand was how important those friendships would eventually become. Within a few years, events both inside and outside Hogwarts would test their loyalty in ways none of them could have predicted. Secrets would emerge, choices would be made, and the bonds formed during these early school years would face pressures far greater than the simple challenges of student life. For now, however, they remained simply four Gryffindor students growing up together in a castle filled with magic, enjoying the freedom and excitement of Hogwarts, while the wider wizarding world slowly drifted toward a conflict that would soon reach even the safety of the school itself. As the boys grew older and more comfortable within the walls of Hogwarts, their friendship deepened in ways that went beyond shared classes and school mischief. By their second and third years, James Potter, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew had become known throughout Gryffindor Tower as an inseparable group. They studied together, explored together, and often found themselves involved in the same small adventures that seemed to define student life at the castle. Yet there was one part of Remus Lupin's life that remained carefully hidden. Every month, without fail, Lupin would disappear from the castle for several days. His absence was always explained in the same quiet way. Professors would simply say that he was ill and needed to recover in the hospital wing or somewhere away from the other students. When he returned, he often looked pale and exhausted, as though he had endured something physically demanding. At first, the other boys accepted these explanations without much question. Illness was not unusual among students, especially when they were exposed to magical creatures, complicated potions, and unpredictable spells during their studies. But over time, certain details began to attract attention. James and Sirius, in particular, were observant when it came to their friends. They noticed patterns that others might have ignored. Remus always disappeared at the same time each month. His injuries sometimes looked unusual, not like the result of ordinary sickness. And perhaps most telling of all, he seemed deeply uncomfortable discussing the subject. For a while, Lupin attempted to keep his condition private. The secret had followed him for most of his life. Being a werewolf in the wizarding world carried a heavy stigma. Fear and misunderstanding surrounded the condition, and many witches and wizards believed werewolves to be dangerous creatures incapable of controlling themselves. Because of that reputation, Lupin had spent his childhood hiding the truth from most people outside his family. His acceptance to Hogwarts had only been possible because of the intervention of Albus Dumbledore. Dumbledore had arranged special precautions that allowed Lupin to attend the school safely without putting other students at risk. Each month, during the full moon, Lupin was taken away from the castle to transform in isolation. The place prepared for these transformations was known as the Shrieking Shack. The building stood in the nearby village of Hogsmeade, deliberately left abandoned because its terrifying noises had frightened away anyone who might otherwise try to enter. Those sounds were actually Lupin's cries during his transformation, but to the outside world they were explained as something far more mysterious. A hidden tunnel connected the castle grounds to the shack, allowing Lupin to reach the building without being seen by other students. For a long time, the system worked exactly as intended, but James, Sirius, and Peter were not the kind of friends who easily ignored a mystery. Gradually, through observation and quiet deduction, the truth began to reveal itself to them. They noticed the timing of the full moon. They noticed Lupin's repeated absences. And eventually, they began to suspect that his illness was something far more serious than an ordinary condition. When they finally confronted Lupin about it, the moment must have been difficult for him. For years, he had feared the possibility that others would discover his secret and react with fear or rejection. Many people in the wizarding world believed that werewolves should be isolated from society entirely. Lupin had every reason to worry that his closest friends might see him differently once they understood the truth. But the reaction he received was very different from what he expected. James Potter, Sirius Black, and Peter Pettigrew did not turn away from him. Instead, they responded with determination. The boys understood the danger involved in Lupin's transformations, but rather than abandoning their friend, they began searching for ways to help him. The idea that Lupin had been facing these nights alone troubled them deeply. What followed would eventually become one of the most remarkable achievements of their time at Hogwarts. The boys discovered that there was a way for them to safely accompany Lupin during his transformations. If they could become animagi, witches or wizards capable of transforming themselves into animals, they would be able to remain near him without provoking the aggressive instincts of the transformed werewolf. The plan was extremely difficult. An Immerse transformation was advanced magic, far beyond the level normally attempted by students. It required years of study, careful preparation, and a deep understanding of magical theory. Even experienced adult wizards sometimes struggled to master it. Yet James, Sirius, and Peter were determined to try. For Lupin, the idea carried both hope and concern. On one hand, the thought of facing the full moon with friends nearby was comforting in a way he had never experienced before. On the other hand, the process they were proposing involved serious risk. If anything went wrong, the consequences could be severe. Still, the bond between the boys had grown strong enough that they chose to move forward together. From that moment onward, their friendship became something deeper than the ordinary alliances formed by schoolmates. It became a shared commitment, built on loyalty and trust. Peter Pettigrew played an important role in that commitment. Though he often seemed less confident than James or Sirius, he remained fully involved in the effort. Learning the complex steps required for an Immerse transformation demanded patience and persistence, qualities that Peter showed quietly as he worked alongside the others. The plan would take several years to complete, but the decision they had made during those conversations changed the nature of their friendship forever. No longer were they simply a group of students exploring the castle and enjoying school life together. They had taken on a secret that bound them closely to one another. It was a secret that would eventually lead to the creation of something remarkable within the halls of Hogwarts. And it all began with the discovery that their quiet friend, Remus Lupin, carried a burden that the others refused to let him face alone. The decision to become animagi was not something James Potter, Sirius Black, and Peter Pettigrew could accomplish quickly. Even among adult witches and wizards, The transformation was considered one of the most complex pieces of magic a person could attempt. It required careful study, months of preparation, and a willingness to accept the risks that came with experimenting with powerful magical processes. For the three Hogwarts students, the idea began as a quiet plan shared only among themselves and Remus Lupin. Lupin understood what they were attempting, but he did not encourage it lightly. The process was difficult even for experienced wizards. Students rarely attempted it, and the transformation itself was strictly regulated by the Ministry of Magic. Anyone capable of becoming an animagus was expected to register their ability officially, both for safety reasons and to prevent misuse of the magic. James, Sirius, and Peter had no intention of registering. Their purpose was very specific. If they could transform into animals, they could accompany Lupin during the nights of the full moon without provoking the violent instincts of his werewolf form. Animals were not seen as threats by a transformed werewolf in the same way humans were. It was a dangerous solution, but it was also the only one they could imagine. The work began quietly during their school years, usually in the evenings after classes had ended. The library at Hogwarts contained countless volumes of magical theory, and hidden among them were the instructions for the animagus process. The information was not simple. It involved a series of precise magical steps that had to be performed correctly over an extended period of time. One of the first stages required immense patience. A witch or wizard attempting the transformation had to hold a specific magical ingredient within their mouth for an entire lunar cycle without removing it. During that time, they also had to perform daily magical incantations while focusing on the desired transformation. For students balancing schoolwork and ordinary life at Hogwarts, maintaining that discipline was extremely difficult. James Potter approached the challenge with determination. His natural confidence helped him push through the frustration that came with such slow progress. Sirius Black, equally stubborn, treated the project almost like a personal challenge, refusing to abandon it even when the work became tedious. Peter Pettigrew worked beside them. Unlike James and Sirius, Peter did not possess the same natural boldness, but he remained committed to the effort. The process demanded long periods of careful focus, and Peter followed each step as precisely as he could. His motivation seemed to come from the same source as the others: loyalty to Remus Lupin and the desire to share in the secret they had chosen together. Remus watched their progress with mixed emotions. Part of him felt deeply grateful that his friends were willing to take such risks for his sake. For most of his life, Lupin had faced his condition alone. The idea that others would stand beside him during the most difficult nights of each month was something he had never expected. At the same time, he worried about the dangers involved. If the animagus transformation went wrong, the consequences could be severe. An improperly performed transformation could leave a wizard trapped between human and animal form, or cause lasting magical damage. Lupin understood these risks and often reminded the others of them, but the three boys continued their work. Months passed, then years. The process demanded patience that few students could sustain, but James, Sirius, and Peter remained committed to their goal. Their friendship strengthened during this time, bound together not only by shared experiences at Hogwarts, but also by the secret project that occupied so much of their attention. Eventually, their efforts began to succeed. The first successful transformation came from James Potter. His animagus form was a stag, a large and powerful animal whose antlers made him unmistakable even in the darkness of the forest surrounding Hogwarts. Sirius followed with a transformation of his own, becoming a large black dog. Peter Pettigrew's transformation came later. His animagus form was a rat, small and quick, capable of slipping through narrow spaces and moving unnoticed through the castle. Compared to the impressive forms of James and Sirius, the rat might have seemed insignificant. Yet, it served an important purpose. A small creature could move quietly and remain hidden in places where larger animals could not. Together, the three transformations created a strange but effective group. James as the stag, Sirius as the dog, and Peter, as the rat, could accompany Remus Lupin during his transformations, without triggering the violent reactions that a werewolf would normally show toward humans. For the first time in his life, Lupin no longer had to face the full moon entirely alone. The boys began slipping out of the castle on certain nights, using the hidden tunnel that led to the Shrieking Shack. Once Lupin had transformed, the three animagi could move beside him through the surrounding countryside. Their animal forms allowed them to guide the werewolf's movements and keep him away from populated areas. These nights were not entirely safe. A transformed werewolf remained a dangerous creature, even among animals. But the presence of the animagi gave Lupin a measure of control that he had never experienced before. Instead of being trapped within the walls of the shack, he could move through the forest and fields outside the village while his friends remained close by. For James, Sirius, and Peter, these experiences became part of their shared identity. They had accomplished something extraordinary. Without permission from the ministry, and without the guidance of experienced mentors, they had successfully mastered a branch of magic that most students never attempted. The secret bound them even more closely together. It also contributed to the name that would eventually become associated with their group throughout Hogwarts. They began referring to themselves in playful terms that reflected their animal forms: the stag, the dog, the wolf, and the rat. Over time, these identities became part of the larger reputation they built within the school. Their adventures during these years were not limited to the nights of the full moon. With the ability to transform into animals, the boys discovered new ways to explore the castle and its surrounding grounds. Hidden passages, secret corridors, and parts of the forest that few students ever visited became accessible to them. And through all of it, Peter Pettigrew remained among them. Though he often followed rather than led, he had played an essential role in the achievement they shared. The rat animagus form he had earned through patience and persistence allowed him to move quietly through spaces others could not reach. For the group, the transformation marked a turning point in their time at Hogwarts. They were no longer simply students navigating their school years together. They had become something more complicated, a group bound by secrets, loyalty, and a willingness to challenge the limits of the magic they had been taught. At the time, these experiences seemed like the greatest adventure of their lives. None of them yet realized how deeply those bonds would be tested in the years to come. By the time the boys had mastered their animagus transformations, their lives at Hogwarts had become filled with secrets that very few others could imagine. The ability to transform into animals had opened new possibilities for exploring the castle and its surrounding grounds. Hidden corridors that had once seemed mysterious could now be investigated more easily. Narrow tunnels, small openings in stone walls, and concealed passageways were suddenly accessible in ways they had never been before. James Potter, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew began spending more time studying the layout of Hogwarts itself. The castle had been built many centuries earlier, and over the course of that long history, countless magical modifications had been made to its structure. Staircases moved from one position to another without warning. Doors appeared where none had existed before. Secret passages connected distant parts of the building in ways that few students ever discovered. For most students, these mysteries remained simply part of the strange charm of Hogwarts. But for the four friends, curiosity slowly turned into something more deliberate. They wanted to understand the castle completely. Their animagus abilities helped enormously with this goal. As animals, they could slip through areas that were normally impossible to reach. Sirius, in his form as a large black dog, could travel the grounds freely without attracting attention. James, as the stag, could move through the forests and fields outside the castle with ease. Peter, as the rat, could squeeze through cracks in stone walls or follow narrow spaces along corridors that humans could never enter. Remus Lupin, though not an animagus himself, shared in the discoveries that followed. Together, they began mapping the school in a way no group of students had attempted before. Each hidden passage they found, each secret door that opened onto an unexpected hallway, became part of a growing understanding of the castle's design. At first, these discoveries were simply remembered between them. They would return to the Gryffindor common room late in the evening and compare what each of them had seen during their explorations. But over time, the boys began to realize that keeping all of this information in their memories alone was becoming difficult. Hogwarts was enormous. New passages seemed to appear every year. Some staircases led to corridors that changed location depending on the day. Other routes connected the castle to areas outside its walls, including paths that led directly into the village of Hogsmeade. Remembering all of these details required something more permanent. It was during this period that the idea of creating a map began to form. The concept itself was ambitious. A simple drawing of the castle would not be enough. The boys wanted something that could reveal the location of passages, secret entrances, and even the movement of people within the building. It would have to be more than a map. It would have to be enchanted. Developing such a magical object required a level of skill that few students possessed. Yet James and Sirius in particular were fascinated by the challenge. They spent long evenings studying magical theory, experimenting with charms that could record information or reveal hidden details. Remus Lupin contributed his careful reasoning and patience, helping them refine the spells they were attempting. And Peter Pettigrew worked alongside them as well, assisting with the small but important steps needed to bring the project together. The work progressed slowly. Enchanting an object to display information about an entire castle was not something that could be accomplished in a single attempt. Spells had to be layered carefully, each one interacting with the others in precise ways. A mistake in the process could cause the magic to collapse entirely, but the four boys were persistent. As months passed, the enchanted parchment they were creating began to take shape. At first, it showed only the physical layout of the castle as they understood it. Lines representing corridors and staircases appeared across the surface of the parchment when certain words were spoken. Later, more complex magic was added. They discovered ways to make the map reveal hidden passages that were normally invisible to the eye. Secret doors appeared as faint lines that could be followed across the parchment. Tunnels connecting Hogwarts to other locations emerged as carefully drawn pathways. The most impressive part of the enchantment came near the end of their work. Through a combination of magical tracking charms and observational spells, they managed to create a system that allowed the map to display the movement of people inside the castle. Small names appeared across the parchment, each one marking the location of a student, professor, or visitor. The result was something extraordinary. When activated with the correct phrase, the map revealed a living image of Hogwarts itself. Corridors filled with moving names, staircases shifting from one location to another, and hidden passages connecting distant parts of the castle all appeared clearly on the enchanted parchment. To most students, such a magical object would have been impossible. But to the four friends who had spent years exploring every corner of the school, the map represented the perfect record of everything they had discovered together. They also gave the map a personality of its own. Rather than presenting itself as a simple tool, the map was enchanted with playful responses designed to mock anyone who attempted to use it without permission. Messages appeared on the parchment when someone tried to reveal its secrets improperly, teasing or insulting the intruder before the map returned to its blank state. These touches reflected the sense of humor shared by the boys who had created it. When they finally completed the enchantment, the map received a name that reflected the identity they had built during their years at Hogwarts. It became known as the Marauders Map. The name referred to the way the four boys had moved through the castle, like mischievous explorers, learning its secrets while avoiding the attention of professors and prefects. Each of them also adopted a nickname connected to their animagus form. James Potter became known as Prongs. Sirius Black took the name Padfoot. Remus Lupin, though not an animagus, was called Moony, and Peter Pettigrew became Wormtail. Together, these identities became part of the map itself. When the parchment was activated, the names of its creators appeared proudly across the surface. announcing the presence of the four friends who had crafted it. For the boys, the map represented more than just a clever magical invention. It was a symbol of their friendship. Every corridor drawn across the parchment reminded them of a night spent exploring the castle together. Every hidden passage reflected a moment when they had worked as a team to uncover another secret of Hogwarts. The map allowed them to continue their adventures with greater confidence, moving through the castle in ways that few other students could match. And Peter Pettigrew remained among them, his name written alongside the others on the enchanted parchment. At the time, the creation of the map felt like the natural continuation of everything they had experienced together at Hogwarts. None of them could have known that the same magical object they had created for mischief and exploration would one day play a role in revealing truths far more serious than any of them had ever imagined. As the boys moved into the later years of their time at Hogwarts, their reputation had already begun to spread through the school. By this point, James Potter, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew were widely known among students and professors alike. Their intelligence, their unusual magical abilities, and their frequent involvement in elaborate mischief had made them difficult to ignore. The name that followed them through the corridors of Hogwarts was one they had embraced themselves. They were the Marauders. Within Gryffindor House, the group was often seen as entertaining rather than troublesome. Their humor, their loyalty to one another, and the confidence with which they moved through the castle made them memorable figures among their classmates. Many students enjoyed the pranks they played, even when those pranks occasionally disrupted ordinary school routines. But not everyone viewed them with the same amusement. Among the students who frequently found himself in conflict with the Marauders was Severus Snape. Snape was a student in Slytherin House, known for his remarkable intelligence and deep interest in the darker branches of magical theory. While he possessed impressive magical ability, his personality often placed him at odds with others around him. He was quiet, observant, and intensely focused on his studies, but he also carried a sharp resentment toward those he believed mocked or underestimated him. From early in their school years, James Potter and Sirius Black developed a strong dislike for Snape. The reasons behind their rivalry were complex. Some of it stemmed from house loyalties. Gryffindor and Slytherin had long been known for their competitive relationship within Hogwarts, and students from each house often clashed during classes or school events. But the tension between the Marauders and Snape went beyond ordinary house rivalry. James and Sirius saw Snape as someone who immersed himself in spells and magical theories that carried darker implications. They disliked the way he moved through the castle alone, watching others carefully and rarely showing any interest in the kind of playful social life that many students enjoyed. Snape, for his part, viewed the Marauders with equal hostility. To him, James Potter represented everything he disliked about Hogwarts culture. James was talented, popular, and confident in ways that seemed effortless. Sirius Black, with his rebellious attitude and sharp sense of humor, often joined James in mocking Snape during their encounters. Peter Pettigrew usually stood nearby during these moments. He rarely initiated the confrontations himself. Instead, he watched as the others took the lead in their arguments with Snape. At times, he laughed along with the jokes, echoing the reactions of his friends. His position within the group remained consistent with the role he had developed over the years. He supported the others, often following their lead rather than shaping events on his own. Remus Lupin, though part of the group, sometimes appeared uncomfortable during these conflicts. Lupin understood the tension that surrounded the Marauders' rivalry with Snape, and he occasionally attempted to calm the situation when things became too heated. Yet his loyalty to his friends often kept him from confronting them directly about their behavior. As the years passed, the confrontations between the two sides grew more noticeable. Students in the corridors began to expect that if James Potter and Sirius Black crossed paths with Severus Snape, some form of argument would follow. Sometimes the exchange consisted only of sharp words or mocking comments. Other times it escalated into demonstrations of magical skill, with each side attempting to outmatch the other. The professors at Hogwarts were aware of the tension, though it was not always easy for them to control it. James and Sirius were talented enough to avoid most serious disciplinary action. They rarely allowed their pranks or confrontations to cross the line into something that would lead to expulsion. Instead, they operated just within the boundaries of what the school rules allowed, occasionally receiving detentions but never enough to end their time at Hogwarts. Peter Pettigrew remained close to them throughout these years. His loyalty to the group seemed unquestioned. He followed James and Sirius through the castle, shared in their laughter, and continued participating in the secret activities that defined their friendship. When the marauders gathered in the common room or disappeared into hidden passages beneath the castle, Peter was almost always there with them. To many students watching from a distance, the group appeared inseparable. James Potter had become one of the most admired students in the school. His success on the Quidditch pitch and his natural confidence made him a central figure in Gryffindor House. Sirius Black's bold personality matched him well, and the two together often seemed like the leaders of the group. Remus Lupin's intelligence and calm judgment gave the marauders a balance that helped them avoid more serious trouble. And Peter Pettigrew remained the fourth member of the circle, quieter but always present. Within the halls of Hogwarts, their presence created a particular atmosphere. When the four of them walked together through the corridors, other students often stepped aside, not out of fear, but out of recognition. The marauders had become a familiar part of the school's daily life. Yet, beneath the laughter and rivalry that defined these years, the outside world was continuing to change. News of Voldemort's growing influence in the wizarding community occasionally reached the castle through conversations among professors and older students. The rising tension beyond Hogwarts was something many students sensed without fully understanding. For James, Sirius, Remus, and Peter, however, those distant events still felt far removed from their daily lives. Their world remained centered within the ancient walls of Hogwarts, where friendships, rivalries, and magical discovery shaped each passing year. The castle still felt like a place of adventure, filled with hidden corridors and enchanted mysteries waiting to be explored. And within that world, the marauders continued to move through their final school years together, unaware that the friendships forged during these moments of youthful confidence would soon face challenges far greater than anything they had yet experienced. By the time the marauders approached the final years of their education at Hogwarts, the wider wizarding world had begun to change in ways that were becoming impossible to ignore. What had once seemed like distant rumors of dark magic were now appearing more frequently in conversations among professors, students, and visitors to the castle. The name of Lord Voldemort was spoken more often, though rarely without hesitation. For many people in the wizarding community, fear had become a quiet but constant presence. Families began taking greater precautions. Some witches and wizards avoided traveling alone. Others became more cautious about discussing politics or magical ideology in public spaces. Voldemort's followers, known as Death Eaters, had grown more active, and their attacks were becoming increasingly difficult for the Ministry of Magic to contain. Even within the safety of Hogwarts, these changes were noticeable. Students arriving from their summer holidays sometimes returned with troubling stories. A neighbor who had disappeared without explanation, a family that had suddenly left the country, a ministry investigation involving dark magic somewhere in the countryside. None of these reports were fully explained to the students, but the pattern was clear enough to create a sense that something serious was unfolding beyond the castle grounds. For older students like James Potter, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew, the growing tension was impossible to ignore. They were approaching the end of their time at Hogwarts, and the question of what came next was becoming more important. In previous years, graduation had represented the beginning of ordinary adult life. Young witches and wizards would choose careers, perhaps working within the Ministry of Magic, opening shops in Diagon Alley, or continuing magical research in various fields. Now the situation seemed far less certain. Voldemort's influence had spread deeply enough that many witches and wizards were beginning to choose sides. whether openly or quietly. Some supported the ideals of pure blood supremacy that Voldemort promoted. Others opposed him completely, believing that the wizarding world must remain united against dark magic. Albus Dumbledore had already begun preparing for the possibility of open conflict. During this period, he quietly gathered witches and wizards who were willing to stand against Voldemort. This group would eventually become known as the Order of the Phoenix, though at the time it existed mostly as a loose network of individuals who trusted Dumbledore's leadership. News of these developments did not remain entirely hidden from Hogwarts students. James Potter in particular seemed increasingly aware of the growing conflict. His family had long opposed the ideology that Voldemort represented, and their position within the wizarding community made them clear supporters of resistance against dark magic. Conversations about the future often included discussions about joining efforts to oppose Voldemort's followers. Sirius Black's situation was more complicated. The Black family had a long tradition of pure blood pride, and several members of the family supported Voldemort's ideology openly. Sirius, however, had rejected those beliefs during his years at Hogwarts. His friendship with James Potter and his open opposition to his family's views had already created a deep division between him and the rest of the Black household. By the time he reached his final year at school, Sirius had effectively separated himself from his family's influence. Remus Lupin faced his own challenges as he looked toward the future. Being a werewolf in the wizarding world made finding employment extremely difficult. Even with Dumbledore's support and his strong academic performance, Lupin understood that many doors would remain closed to him simply because of the stigma surrounding his condition. Peter Pettigrew approached the future with a different kind of uncertainty. Unlike James, Sirius, or Remus, Peter did not possess a clear direction or strong personal ambition. His identity had always been closely tied to his friendship with the others. As their final year approached, he remained closely connected to them, often listening quietly as they discussed their plans after leaving Hogwarts. The idea of joining the struggle against Voldemort gradually became part of those conversations. James Potter spoke about it openly. He believed strongly that Voldemort's ideology represented a dangerous threat to the wizarding world. Sirius shared that belief, though his reasons were shaped partly by his rejection of his family's values. Remus Lupin supported the idea as well, though he remained cautious about how much he could realistically contribute given the limitations placed on him by his condition. Peter Pettigrew agreed with them, at least outwardly. The friendships formed during their years at Hogwarts had created a sense of loyalty that seemed genuine. For Peter, standing beside his friends as they discussed opposing Voldemort may have felt like the natural continuation of the bond they had shared since their first journey on the Hogwarts Express. Graduation arrived with the same traditions that had marked the end of the school year for generations of students. Examinations were completed. Farewell feasts filled the Great Hall with celebration. Students packed their belongings and prepared to leave the castle that had shaped their childhood. For the Marauders, the final walk through the corridors of Hogwarts must have carried a mixture of pride and uncertainty. They had achieved remarkable things during their time at the school. They had mastered the difficult art of becoming animagi. They had created the enchanted Marauders map. Their adventures and reputation had become part of Hogwarts legend among their classmates. Now they were stepping into a world that was becoming increasingly dangerous. Outside the protective boundaries of Hogwarts, Voldemort's influence continued to grow. The Wizarding War that had once seemed distant was becoming more real with every passing year. For James Potter, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew, the next stage of their lives would soon place them directly within that conflict. At the moment of their graduation, however, they were still simply 4 young wizards standing together as friends, leaving behind the familiar towers of Hogwarts and preparing to face a future that none of them could fully predict. Leaving Hogwarts marked the end of one chapter of life and the beginning of another that felt far less certain. For generations of witches and wizards, The transition from student to adult had followed familiar paths. Many graduates entered careers within the Ministry of Magic, joined established magical businesses, or pursued further study in specialized fields. But by the time James Potter, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew stepped beyond the castle gates, the wizarding world they were entering had already begun to change. Lord Voldemort's influence was spreading steadily, and the growing conflict had begun to draw more witches and wizards into open resistance. The attacks carried out by Death Eaters had increased in frequency, and entire communities were beginning to feel the effects. Disappearances, mysterious killings, and acts of intimidation had become disturbingly common. In response to these developments, Albus Dumbledore had taken steps to organize those willing to oppose Voldemort directly. The group he formed came to be known as the Order of the Phoenix. Unlike official ministry organizations, the Order operated largely in secrecy. Many within the ministry either underestimated the threat Voldemort posed or feared confronting it openly. Dumbledore believed that waiting for government action would allow Voldemort to grow even stronger. Instead, he gathered individuals he trusted, witches and wizards, who were prepared to resist dark magic even when the danger was personal. Members of the Order came from many different backgrounds. Some were experienced auras trained to fight dark wizards. Others were scholars, healers, or ordinary witches and wizards who simply believed that Voldemort's vision for the wizarding world could not be allowed to succeed. Among those who eventually joined were several recent graduates of Hogwarts. James Potter and Sirius Black were among the first of the Marauders to become involved. Their loyalty to Dumbledore, combined with their strong opposition to Voldemort's ideology, made the decision feel almost inevitable. Both were young, talented, and willing to take risks if it meant protecting others from the growing darkness. Remus Lupin also joined the Order, though his reasons carried a different kind of determination. Lupin had lived much of his life facing prejudice because of his condition as a werewolf. Voldemort's movement, which often embraced ideas of magical superiority and purity, represented a direct threat to individuals like him. Supporting Dumbledore's resistance offered Lupin a chance to fight for a world where people were judged by their choices rather than their circumstances. Peter Pettigrew joined as well. At first, his presence among the members of the Order seemed entirely natural. He had shared years of friendship with James, Sirius, and Remus, and his loyalty to them had rarely been questioned. During their time at Hogwarts, he had followed them into secret adventures and supported their efforts to help Lupin through the most difficult nights of each month. Standing beside them again as they entered the struggle against Voldemort appeared to be simply the continuation of that same loyalty. The Order of the Phoenix did not operate as a conventional army. Its members worked in small groups, gathering information about Voldemort's activities and attempting to counter his growing network of supporters. Meetings were often held in secret locations, where Dumbledore could coordinate efforts without attracting the attention of the Death Eaters. For the younger members of the Order, these gatherings were often the first time they encountered the full scale of the conflict. Reports arrived from many parts of the wizarding world, describing attacks on families, infiltration of institutions, and the recruitment of powerful witches and wizards by Voldemort. Each meeting made it clearer that the struggle ahead would be long and dangerous. James Potter embraced the challenge with the same bold confidence he had displayed during his years at Hogwarts. His magical abilities and fearless personality made him a valuable member of the Order, particularly during missions that required quick thinking and courage. Sirius Black proved equally capable. His sharp instincts and determination to stand against his family's old beliefs made him fiercely committed to the cause. Sirius also possessed the animagus ability he had developed during his school years, allowing him to transform into a large black dog when necessary. Remus Lupin contributed in ways that went beyond direct combat. Because of his condition as a werewolf, Lupin had connections within communities that most witches and wizards rarely encountered, Some of Voldemort's followers attempted to recruit werewolves by promising them greater freedom and influence in the new order they hoped to create. Lupin's presence within the order allowed Dumbledore to understand these efforts more clearly. Peter Pettigrew remained close to his friends throughout these early days of the order. Outwardly, he appeared committed to the same cause. He attended meetings, listened to discussions about strategy, and participated in the work assigned to him. His loyalty to James, Sirius, and Remus seemed unchanged from the years they had spent together at Hogwarts. Yet the world they had entered was far more dangerous than the adventures of their school days. The First Wizarding War had begun in earnest. Voldemort's followers operated with increasing boldness, attacking not only individuals, but entire families who opposed them. Even powerful magical institutions found themselves under pressure as Death Eaters attempted to expand their influence. Members of the Order of the Phoenix understood that every action they took carried risk. Some missions involved gathering information about Death Eater movements. Others required protecting families who had been targeted. Occasionally, they found themselves directly confronting dark wizards whose loyalty to Voldemort was absolute. For the young members of the Order, these experiences marked a dramatic shift from the relatively safe environment of Hogwarts. Friendship remained important, but survival and strategy now shaped their daily lives. The choices they made during these years would determine not only their own futures, but the fate of the wizarding world itself. And among those standing within the ranks of the Order was Peter Pettigrew, the quiet fourth member of the Marauders, whose loyalty to his friends had always seemed certain. At that moment, no one around him could yet imagine how deeply that loyalty would eventually be tested. As the war intensified, the wizarding world began to change in ways that could be felt in nearly every part of magical society. What had once been whispered rumors of Voldemort's growing influence had now become an undeniable reality. The attacks carried out by his followers were no longer isolated incidents. Entire communities began to feel the pressure of a conflict that seemed to spread quietly but relentlessly. Fear became a constant companion for many witches and wizards. Families who had once felt safe within their homes now took precautions they had never considered before. Protective enchantments were strengthened around houses. Some families avoided public gatherings entirely. Others began moving frequently, hoping to avoid attracting attention from Death Eaters who seemed to appear without warning. Even the Ministry of Magic struggled to respond effectively. Officials were aware that Voldemort's followers were growing in number, but identifying them proved extremely difficult. The Death Eaters concealed their identities behind masks and robes during attacks, and many of them were respected members of wizarding society when those masks were removed. Suspicion began spreading through the ministry itself as rumors circulated that Voldemort had sympathizers within its own ranks. For members of the Order of the Phoenix, the war quickly became personal. Meetings were no longer limited to discussions about strategy. Reports arrived describing friends who had disappeared, families who had been targeted, and witches and wizards who had fallen in direct confrontations with Death Eaters. The group understood that Voldemort's influence was expanding faster than anyone had predicted. James Potter and Sirius Black responded to this reality with determination. Both had always possessed a natural courage, and that quality now defined their role within the Order. They participated in missions that required confronting Death Eaters directly, using the magical skill they had developed during their years at Hogwarts. Their willingness to act boldly earned them respect among other members of the group. Remus Lupin continued contributing in quieter but equally important ways. His understanding of communities that existed outside the ordinary structure of wizarding society allowed him to gather information that others could not easily obtain. Lupin often traveled alone, speaking with individuals who might have knowledge about Voldemort's movements or the recruitment of new followers. Peter Pettigrew remained among them throughout these efforts. At meetings, he listened carefully as plans were discussed. During missions, he followed the instructions given to him, staying close to the friends he had known since childhood. Outwardly, he appeared to share their commitment to resisting Voldemort's rise. But the reality of the war placed enormous pressure on everyone involved. Unlike the adventures of their school years, the dangers they now faced carried real consequences. Confrontations with Death Eaters could lead to serious injury or death. The uncertainty surrounding Voldemort himself added another layer of fear. His magical abilities were widely believed to exceed those of most wizards alive, and stories about his ruthlessness spread rapidly through the wizarding world. For someone like Peter Pettigrew, the experience may have been particularly unsettling. Throughout his life, Peter had often relied on the strength and confidence of those around him. At Hogwarts, he had stood beside James and Sirius, sharing in their reputation and protection. Within the Order of the Phoenix, he again found himself surrounded by individuals who seemed fearless in the face of danger. Yet the war demanded more than loyalty. It required personal courage in situations where survival was uncertain. Members of the Order sometimes disappeared during missions, leaving behind only fragments of information about what had happened. The possibility that Voldemort's followers might capture or kill them was always present. Each meeting carried the knowledge that someone might not return from the next assignment. These realities created a growing sense of anxiety within the wizarding community. Even those who were not directly involved in the conflict could feel its effects. Shops in Diagon Alley occasionally closed earlier than usual. Owl posts sometimes carried grim news from distant relatives. Conversations about the future often included questions about how long the war might continue. Within this environment, Voldemort's strategy relied heavily on spreading fear. He understood that intimidation could weaken resistance as effectively as open battle. Death Eaters often targeted families known for opposing his ideology, hoping that others would see the consequences and choose silence instead of resistance. Some witches and wizards did exactly that. A number of people who might otherwise have spoken against Voldemort chose to remain neutral, believing that avoiding involvement offered the safest path forward. Others quietly supported his movement, either out of genuine belief in his ideas or from fear of what might happen if they refused. For the members of the Order of the Phoenix, these developments made their mission even more urgent. They understood that if Voldemort's influence continued to grow unchecked, the wizarding world could eventually fall under his control entirely. Dumbledore's leadership kept the group focused, but even he could not guarantee success against an enemy whose power and ambition seemed limitless. As the months passed, the war grew darker. Deaths became more common, the Ministry struggled to maintain control, and Voldemort himself began appearing more openly, leading attacks that demonstrated the full extent of his magical strength. In the midst of all this, Peter Pettigrew remained part of the Order's inner circle. He attended meetings alongside James Potter, Sirius Black, and Remus Lupin, sharing in the discussions about how best to oppose Voldemort's growing power. To those around him, he appeared to be simply another young wizard doing his part in a dangerous struggle. Yet beneath the surface of these events, fear was shaping choices that would soon alter the course of the war itself. And within the ranks of those sworn to resist Voldemort, the quiet fourth member of the Marauders was beginning to face a decision that would change everything. As the First Wizarding War continued to deepen, the pressure placed upon those involved in the conflict became increasingly difficult to endure. Members of the Order of the Phoenix were asked to confront dangers that few witches and wizards had ever faced before. Every mission carried uncertainty. Every meeting brought new reports of violence, betrayal, or disappearance. Even those who possessed great magical skill found themselves tested by the scale of the threat. For Peter Pettigrew, the weight of these events may have felt particularly heavy. Throughout his life, Peter had rarely stood at the center of dangerous situations. At Hogwarts, he had been protected by the confidence of his friends. James Potter and Sirius Black were known for their courage, while Remus Lupin provided steady judgment and intelligence. Peter had always moved within the safety created by that group. Now the war demanded something different. The Order of the Phoenix operated in secrecy, but secrecy could not eliminate danger. Death Eaters were known to infiltrate communities, gather information, and identify individuals who opposed Voldemort. Those identified often became targets for intimidation or violence. Stories of these attacks circulated constantly among members of the Order. Some spoke of entire households destroyed during the night. Others described witches and wizards who had vanished after being captured by Voldemort's followers. The exact details were not always known, but the pattern was clear enough to create a growing sense of fear. Peter listened to these reports alongside his friends. Outwardly, he continued to support the same cause they did, but internally, the atmosphere of the war may have begun to affect him differently. Courage, in the face of danger, often requires a deep sense of certainty about one's purpose. For James and Sirius, that certainty seemed natural. They believed strongly that Voldemort's ideology had to be resisted at all costs. Remus Lupin carried a similar conviction, though expressed more quietly. Peter's feelings were less clear. The fear that surrounded Voldemort was not exaggerated. Those who opposed him openly risked becoming targets themselves. His followers were powerful and often ruthless, willing to use dark magic without hesitation. And Voldemort himself was widely believed to be the most dangerous wizard alive. For someone already inclined toward caution, the knowledge of that power could be overwhelming. Over time, Voldemort's network of supporters became increasingly skilled at gathering information about those who resisted him. Members of the Order of the Phoenix were especially valuable targets. If Voldemort could learn about their plans, their locations, or their allies, he could weaken the resistance significantly. It was during this period that Voldemort's attention turned toward Peter Pettigrew. Exactly how the first contact occurred remains uncertain, but it likely involved careful observation. Voldemort and his followers were known for identifying individuals who might be vulnerable to persuasion or intimidation. They understood that not every opponent possessed the same level of resolve. Peter Pettigrew, with his anxious temperament and visible dependence on stronger personalities, may have appeared to them as someone who could be influenced. The approach would not have been made openly at first. Voldemort rarely revealed himself directly when subtle methods could achieve the same result. Instead, intermediaries or carefully chosen messages were often used to test whether a potential target might be willing to listen. For Peter, the situation must have been terrifying. Being contacted by Voldemort's followers meant facing the full reality of the war in a very personal way. The choice placed before him was not simply about loyalty or ideology, it was about survival. On one side stood the Order of the Phoenix, his friends, and the resistance they represented. On the other side stood Voldemort, a figure whose reputation for power and cruelty had spread through the wizarding world like a shadow. The decision Peter eventually made would define the rest of his life. Fear played a central role in that decision. Voldemort's supporters were skilled at convincing people that resistance was hopeless. They spoke of the Dark Lord's growing strength, of the witches and wizards already aligned with him, and of the consequences faced by those who refused to cooperate. For someone already uncertain about his ability to survive the war, the message could be persuasive. Gradually, Peter Pettigrew began providing information. At first, the details may have seemed small. A conversation overheard during an order meeting, the location of a gathering place, the movements of certain members traveling between assignments. Each piece of information alone might not have appeared decisive, but together they formed a pattern. Voldemort's followers were able to anticipate certain actions taken by the Order of the Phoenix. Missions that had once been conducted in secrecy suddenly encountered unexpected resistance. Death Eaters appeared in places where they should not have known to look. Within the Order, suspicion slowly began to grow. Members realized that someone must be sharing information with the enemy. The idea that a spy existed within their ranks was deeply troubling, but identifying that person proved extremely difficult. The Order was built on trust, and many members had known one another for years. Peter Pettigrew continued attending meetings alongside his friends. James Potter, Sirius Black, and Remus Lupin had no reason to suspect him. Their friendship stretched back to childhood, strengthened by years of shared experiences at Hogwarts. The thought that Peter might betray them would have seemed almost impossible. Yet the information continued to reach Voldemort. Each report Peter delivered brought him deeper into a relationship with the Dark Lord's followers. The more he cooperated, the more difficult it became to reverse his decision. Fear that Voldemort might discover any attempt at defiance likely kept him moving forward. In time, Peter Pettigrew had become exactly what Voldemort needed, a spy hidden within the Order of the Phoenix. From the outside, he remained the quiet fourth member of the Marauders, standing beside friends who trusted him completely. But beneath that familiar appearance, his loyalties had begun to shift in a way that would soon lead to consequences far greater than anyone within the Order could yet imagine. Once Peter Pettigrew had taken the first steps toward cooperating with Voldemort's followers, the situation began to change quickly. What may have started as small pieces of information soon became something far more serious. Voldemort valued knowledge above almost anything else during the war. Understanding the movements of his enemies allowed him to strike at the right moment, and a spy within the Order of the Phoenix provided exactly the advantage he needed. Pettigrew now occupied a dangerous position between two worlds. Among the members of the Order, he remained trusted. James Potter, Sirius Black, and Remus Lupin continued to see him as the same friend they had known since childhood. The years they had spent together at Hogwarts had created a bond that seemed impossible to break. Their shared memories of the castle, the Marauders' map, and the nights spent helping Lupin through his transformations had formed a foundation of loyalty that none of them questioned. Yet Peter was now carrying information from those meetings elsewhere. The details he passed along did not always involve major operations. Often they were fragments of conversation, hints about where certain members might travel next, or descriptions of how the Order was attempting to track Voldemort's followers. Even small pieces of information could be valuable when combined with other reports gathered by the Death Eaters. Voldemort understood how to use such information carefully. He rarely acted immediately on what he learned from Pettigrew. Instead, he allowed the knowledge to accumulate, watching how the Order moved and how they responded to various threats. This patience helped prevent the Order from realizing that their plans were being observed. At the same time, Pettigrew's connection to Voldemort began to deepen. The Dark Lord did not trust easily. Loyalty to him was often secured through fear as much as admiration. Those who served him understood that failure could bring severe consequences. Pettigrew would have been aware of this reputation from the beginning. Each message he delivered increased the danger that he would face if he ever attempted to withdraw from the arrangement. The result was a slow but steady transformation in his role within the war. Where once he had simply been a member of the Order following the leadership of Dumbledore and his friends, he had now become an important source of intelligence for Voldemort's growing network. The information he carried helped the Death Eaters anticipate movements and locate individuals who opposed them. This influence did not remain entirely invisible. From time to time, the Order of the Phoenix found itself confronted by unexpected difficulties. Plans that had seemed secure were occasionally interrupted by Death Eater activity. Certain safe locations no longer felt as safe as they once had. Though no one could identify exactly how Voldemort was learning these things, the pattern began to trouble many within the group. Suspicions slowly emerged. Members of the Order began wondering whether someone within their own ranks might be passing information to the enemy. The idea was deeply unsettling, but it could not be dismissed. Voldemort's followers seemed too well informed for coincidence alone to explain their success. Yet identifying the spy proved nearly impossible. The Order operated with secrecy and trust, and most of its members had strong personal connections with one another. Accusing someone without clear evidence could damage the unity that allowed them to continue resisting Voldemort. Dumbledore himself believed that careful observation would eventually reveal the truth, but for the time being, the group had no clear suspect. Peter Pettigrew remained hidden behind that uncertainty. His position among the Marauders made him appear unlikely as a traitor. James Potter and Sirius Black were both known for their courage and outspoken opposition to Voldemort. Remus Lupin had dedicated himself to supporting the Order despite the challenges of his own life. Peter's association with them created an assumption that his loyalty matched theirs. Voldemort recognized the advantage this provided. The Dark Lord valued Pettigrew precisely because no one expected betrayal from someone in his position. A spy who appeared weak or insignificant could move unnoticed among powerful allies. Pettigrew's nervous manner and tendency to follow others' lead may have made him seem harmless in the eyes of those around him. But to Voldemort, those qualities were useful. Gradually, the information Pettigrew provided allowed the Death Eaters to refine their strategies. They could track the activities of the Order more closely, anticipate certain protective measures, and focus their attacks where they would cause the greatest disruption. For Pettigrew himself, the situation became increasingly difficult to escape. Once a person had aligned themselves with Voldemort, even secretly, stepping away carried enormous risk. The Dark Lord was not known for forgiving those who attempted to abandon him. Fear of what might happen if his actions were discovered likely kept Pettigrew moving forward, continuing to provide information even as the war grew darker. Meanwhile, his friends remained unaware. James Potter still trusted him completely. Sirius Black never imagined that the quiet fourth member of their group could betray them. Remus Lupin, who had once shared the most personal secret of his life with the others, believed that the bond they had formed during their school years remained unbroken. The war continued to escalate around them. Deaths increased, and Voldemort's followers grew bolder with each passing month. The wizarding world seemed to be moving steadily toward a confrontation that would decide its future. And within the ranks of those fighting to prevent that future, Peter Pettigrew continued to carry secrets that would soon lead to one of the most devastating betrayals the wizarding world had ever known. During the height of the war, events began to unfold that would eventually shape the final years of Voldemort's first rise to power. Among the many pieces of information circulating within the wizarding world at the time, one in particular would become central to the conflict between Voldemort and the Order of the Phoenix. It began with a prophecy. The prophecy was spoken by Sybil Trelawney, a witch who had been interviewed by Albus Dumbledore for the position of divination professor at Hogwarts. During the interview, she entered a trance-like state and delivered a message describing a child who would one day possess the power to defeat the Dark Lord. The prophecy itself was incomplete when it was overheard. Severus Snape, who had been present at the location where the interview took place, managed to hear only the first portion before being discovered and removed from the room. Despite hearing only part of the message, what he learned was enough to create immediate concern. Snape reported the information directly to Voldemort. From Voldemort's perspective, the prophecy represented a potential threat that could not be ignored. Even though he possessed enormous magical power, he had always been cautious about any possibility that his rule might one day be challenged. The idea that a child could grow into someone capable of defeating him was something he refused to allow. The prophecy itself referred to a child who would be born at the end of July to parents who had already defied Voldemort several times. Within the wizarding world at that time, two families matched that description. One was the family of James and Lily Potter. The other was the family of Frank and Alice Longbottom. Both couples were members of the Order of the Phoenix, and both had resisted Voldemort during earlier confrontations. The prophecy did not clearly identify which child would become the one described in the vision, but Voldemort believed that the child of the Potters posed the greater threat. As a result, James and Lily Potter suddenly became central figures in the unfolding events of the war. Dumbledore understood the danger immediately. Once it became clear that Voldemort had learned part of the prophecy, the Potters required protection stronger than anything the Order had previously used. Ordinary concealment would not be enough. Voldemort's followers were already searching for them. The decision was made to use a powerful piece of magic known as the Fidelius Charm. The Fidelius Charm was designed to hide a secret within the soul of a single individual known as the Secret Keeper. As long as the Secret Keeper did not reveal the information willingly, the secret would remain completely hidden. Even if someone stood directly in front of the concealed location, they would not be able to perceive it without being told the secret by the Keeper. For the Potters, the secret that needed protection was the location of their home in Godric's Hollow. If the Fidelius charm was cast successfully, Voldemort and his followers would be unable to find them unless the secret keeper revealed the location. The challenge, however, lay in choosing the right person to hold that responsibility. At first, Sirius Black seemed the obvious choice. Sirius was one of James Potter's closest friends and had proven his loyalty repeatedly throughout their years together. His courage during the war had already become well known among members of the Order. Many believed that Sirius would rather die than betray the location of the Potter's home. Voldemort himself was also likely to assume that Sirius held this role. Because of that expectation, Sirius eventually suggested a different plan. Instead of acting as secret keeper himself, he proposed that the responsibility be given to someone else entirely. If Voldemort believed Sirius was the keeper, he would focus his efforts on capturing Sirius, never realizing that the real secret was held by another person. The individual chosen for that role was Peter Pettigrew. To those involved in the decision, the idea seemed sensible. Peter was known to be a loyal friend who had stood beside James, Sirius, and Remus since their school days. His quiet personality and lack of public attention made him an unlikely target for Voldemort's suspicion. The plan relied on the assumption that Peter's loyalty was unquestionable. For Peter Pettigrew, the moment must have carried an extraordinary weight. He was now being entrusted with the most important secret of the war. The safety of James, Lily, and their infant son Harry depended entirely on his silence. As secret keeper, he alone possessed the knowledge that could lead Voldemort directly to them. Yet by the time the Fidelius charm was cast, Peter was already serving Voldemort as a spy. The secret placed within his care would soon become the most valuable piece of information the Dark Lord had received during the entire war. For the Potters and their friends, however, the spell represented hope. They believed that the magic protecting the house at Godric's Hollow would keep Voldemort away long enough for the conflict to shift in their favor. The Fidelius charm was among the most powerful defensive spells known in the wizarding world. As long as the secret keeper remained loyal, the Potters would remain safe. But the success of the spell depended entirely on a single person, and that person was Peter Pettigrew. The Fidelius charm was one of the most powerful defensive spells known in the wizarding world, but its strength depended entirely on the person chosen to guard the secret. Once the charm was completed, the location it protected became impossible to discover through ordinary means. Even if someone stood directly outside the hidden house, they would see nothing unless the secret keeper chose to reveal the information. For James and Lily Potter, this magic represented their greatest hope of survival. Their home in Godric's Hollow became the center of the enchantment. From that moment forward, the address of the house existed only within the knowledge of one individual. Anyone wishing to find the Potters would first need to obtain that secret from the keeper himself. When the charm was first discussed, Sirius Black had seemed the obvious choice. His loyalty to James Potter was unquestioned, and his courage during the war had already become well known among the members of the Order of the Phoenix. Voldemort's followers were aware of Sirius's close friendship with James, and it was widely assumed that Sirius would eventually be responsible for guarding the secret. But Sirius himself believed that expectation could become a weakness. If Voldemort assumed that Sirius was the secret keeper, then Sirius would almost certainly become the primary target of the Dark Lord's search. Death Eaters would focus their efforts on capturing him, hoping to force the secret from him through whatever means they could. To prevent that outcome, Sirius proposed a different plan. Instead of acting as secret keeper himself, he suggested that the role should be given to Peter Pettigrew. The reasoning behind the decision seemed logical at the time. Peter was a close friend who had stood beside them since their earliest years at Hogwarts. His quiet personality and lack of attention made him appear unlikely to attract suspicion from Voldemort's followers. If the Dark Lord believed Sirius held the secret, then Peter would remain hidden from notice. James Potter trusted Peter completely. Their friendship stretched back nearly a decade, through years of shared experiences at Hogwarts and the early days of the war. Peter had been present during the creation of the Marauders map, during the nights spent helping Remus Lupin through his transformations, and during countless other moments that had strengthened the bond between them. For James, the idea that Peter might betray him would have seemed impossible. Remus Lupin also accepted the plan without question. Like James and Sirius, he believed that the loyalty shared among the Marauders remained as strong as it had always been. The Fidelius charm was performed, placing the secret of the Potter's location within Peter Pettigrew. From that moment forward, the safety of the family depended entirely on his silence. To the outside world, nothing appeared different. The small house in Godric's Hollow remained part of the quiet village where it had always stood. Neighbors went about their daily routines, unaware that one of the most important magical secrets of the war was hidden nearby. Within the Order of the Phoenix, the charm created a sense of cautious relief. The Potters were now protected by a spell that few enemies could hope to overcome. Voldemort would be unable to locate them unless the secret was willingly revealed by the Keeper. As long as Peter remained loyal, the house would remain hidden, but Peter's loyalty had already begun to shift. His connection to Voldemort had developed gradually during the previous months. Fear of the Dark Lord's power had led him into cooperation that he could no longer easily escape. The position of Secret Keeper now placed him in possession of information more valuable than anything he had previously delivered. Voldemort had been searching for the Potters. The prophecy he had learned about suggested that a child born to them might one day possess the power to defeat him. For Voldemort, eliminating that threat before it could grow was essential. But until the Fidelius charm was cast, the location of the Potters had remained uncertain. Now that secret rested entirely within Peter Pettigrew's knowledge. The moment he accepted the role of Secret Keeper, the path toward the final betrayal had already begun. From Voldemort's perspective, the opportunity was extraordinary. A spy inside the Order had been given direct access to the very secret the Dark Lord needed most. If Peter revealed the location of the Potters, Voldemort could strike before anyone realized what had happened. For Peter himself, the situation must have been terrifying. The choice before him was no longer abstract. The decision involved the lives of people who had trusted him completely, yet he also knew the consequences of opposing Voldemort. The Dark Lord's reputation for punishing betrayal was well known throughout the wizarding world. Fear had guided many of Peter's earlier choices. Now that fear pushed him toward a moment that would change the course of the war. The Fidelius charm had been designed as the ultimate protection, but it contained one unavoidable weakness. The spell could guard a secret against any magical force, yet it could not protect against the will of the person who carried the secret itself. If the Secret Keeper chose to speak, the protection vanished instantly. Peter Pettigrew alone possessed that power. Within the quiet house in Godric's Hollow, James and Lily Potter believed they were safe. Their infant son Harry slept peacefully under the protection of one of the strongest defensive spells ever created. Friends within the Order trusted that the charm would hold until the war eventually ended. But the fate of the Potters no longer depended on magic. It depended on the courage of the man who carried their secret. And Peter Pettigrew had already begun to lose that courage. Once Peter Pettigrew had become the Secret Keeper for the Potters, the most important decision of his life lay before him. The Fidelius charm had hidden the location of James and Lily's home from every enemy searching for them. Voldemort himself, despite his enormous magical power, could not discover the house unless the secret was willingly revealed. Only one person possessed that knowledge, Peter Pettigrew. For a short time after the charm was cast, the situation appeared stable. The Potters remained hidden in their home at Godric's Hollow, protected by the enchantment that concealed them from Voldemort's followers. Members of the Order of the Phoenix believed the plan had worked exactly as intended. Sirius Black continued allowing others to assume that he was the Secret Keeper, drawing attention away from Peter. But the war had already created the conditions that would lead to the final betrayal. Voldemort's influence was expanding rapidly. His followers continued gathering information about the Order, searching for weaknesses that could be exploited. The prophecy he had learned about still occupied his thoughts. A child born at the end of July to parents who had defied him several times had been identified as a possible threat to his future. Voldemort had decided that the child must be destroyed. With Peter Pettigrew acting as his spy, Voldemort now possessed a connection that could bring him closer to that goal than ever before. The information Peter carried was exactly what the Dark Lord needed. At some point during those final weeks of the war's early stage, Peter revealed the secret. He told Voldemort where the Potters were hiding. The moment those words were spoken, the protection offered by the Fidelius charm was effectively broken. The spell itself remained intact, but its purpose had been defeated. Once the Secret Keeper willingly revealed the hidden location, anyone who received that knowledge could find the house without difficulty. Voldemort wasted little time acting on the information. The opportunity before him was too valuable to risk losing. If the prophecy was correct, the child living in that house might one day grow into the only wizard capable of defeating him. Eliminating that threat immediately seemed like the most logical course of action. On the night of the attack, Voldemort traveled to the village of Godric's Hollow. The small community was quiet, its houses standing peacefully among narrow streets and gardens. To the ordinary residents of the village, the night would have seemed no different from any other. Few people could have imagined that one of the most powerful dark wizards in history had arrived nearby. Inside the Potter home, James and Lily were unaware that the secret protecting them had already been betrayed. They believed that Peter Pettigrew still guarded the location faithfully. The Fidelius charm had been placed only a short time earlier, and they had no reason to suspect that their friend had already revealed the information to Voldemort. When Voldemort reached the house, the protective enchantment offered no resistance. The Dark Lord entered without difficulty. What followed occurred quickly. James Potter was inside the house when Voldemort arrived, but he did not have time to prepare a defense. James had always been brave, but courage alone could not overcome the sudden appearance of a wizard whose power had already become legendary. James attempted to confront Voldemort, but the encounter ended almost immediately. He was killed while trying to protect his family. Upstairs, Lily Potter was with their infant son, Harry. When Voldemort entered the room, he intended to eliminate the child described in the prophecy. Lily stood between them, refusing to step aside, even when Voldemort offered her the chance to survive. Her decision was an act of extraordinary courage. Rather than abandoning her son, Lily remained in front of Harry despite knowing that she could not defeat Voldemort. Her refusal to move forced Voldemort to act. He killed her as well. With the parents gone, Voldemort turned his attention to the child lying in the crib. Harry Potter was only a baby, unable to understand the danger surrounding him. Voldemort raised his wand and cast the curse he had used countless times before. But something unexpected happened. The spell meant to kill the child did not behave as Voldemort intended. Instead of destroying Harry, the curse rebounded upon Voldemort himself. The exact magical reasons behind this event would later be studied and discussed for years. Lily's sacrifice had created a powerful form of protective magic, one that Voldemort had not anticipated. When the curse struck him, Voldemort's physical body was destroyed. His power was shattered in a single moment, leaving behind only a fragment of existence that fled the ruined house in search of survival. The attack that was meant to eliminate a future enemy had instead ended the Dark Lord's first rise to power. In the aftermath of the explosion, the house in Godric's Hollow stood partially destroyed. James and Lily Potter were dead, but Harry Potter had survived. News of the event spread rapidly through the wizarding world. The Dark Lord, who had terrorized magical society for years, had suddenly disappeared. Death Eaters who had served him began to scatter, many claiming they had been under his influence against their will. Within the Order of the Phoenix, the shock was overwhelming. The war that had seemed unstoppable had ended in a single night. Voldemort was gone, and the child who survived the attack quickly became known throughout the wizarding world as the boy who lived. Yet behind this extraordinary outcome remained the truth of how the tragedy had begun. The location of the Potters had been revealed by the one person they trusted to protect it. Peter Pettigrew's betrayal had set the entire chain of events in motion, and while Voldemort had fallen during the attack, the consequences of that betrayal were only beginning to unfold. In the chaotic hours following the destruction of Voldemort's body at Godric's Hollow, confusion spread quickly through the wizarding world. News traveled unevenly, carried by hurried messages, whispered rumors, and fragments of information passed between members of the Order of the Phoenix. Few people fully understood what had happened yet. What was clear, however, was that James and Lily Potter were dead, and Voldemort had vanished. For Sirius Black, the news struck with devastating force. James Potter had been his closest friend since their first days at Hogwarts. Their lives had been intertwined for years through shared adventures, battles during the war, and the bond of brotherhood that had formed between them. When Sirius learned of the attack on Godric's Hollow, grief quickly turned into determination. He believed he knew exactly who was responsible. Sirius had helped create the plan that placed Peter Pettigrew in the position of Secret Keeper. The decision had been intended as a clever strategy to mislead Voldemort. Instead, the results suggested something far more terrible. If Voldemort had been able to find the Potters, then the secret had been revealed, and only one person possessed that knowledge. Sirius immediately began searching for Peter Pettigrew. By this time, Peter had already realized that the consequences of his betrayal were closing in around him. Voldemort had fallen, but the Order of the Phoenix remained intact. If the truth about the Fidelius charm became known, it would be obvious that only the Secret Keeper could have revealed the location of the Potters. Peter needed to disappear. Before Sirius could reach him, Pettigrew set a desperate plan into motion. Rather than simply fleeing and risking capture, he decided to stage his own death in a way that would place the blame elsewhere. The location he chose for this confrontation was a public street filled with witnesses. When Sirius finally found him, Peter made sure that many people were nearby to observe what followed. The street contained several Muggle bystanders who had no understanding of the magical conflict surrounding the two men. Their presence would soon become an important part of Peter's plan. According to the accounts that later circulated, Peter appeared frightened when Sirius confronted him. He shouted accusations loudly enough for the surrounding crowd to hear. His voice carried through the street as he blamed Sirius for betraying James and Lily to Voldemort. The words were chosen carefully. Anyone listening would hear only a terrified wizard accusing his former friend of terrible crimes. Sirius, shocked and furious, demanded that Peter stop lying, but Peter had already prepared the final step of his deception. With his wand raised, he cast a powerful spell directly into the street. The explosion tore through the ground with tremendous force, destroying part of the pavement and killing several of the nearby Muggle bystanders instantly. The blast created chaos among the witnesses who remained alive, leaving them terrified and confused. In the middle of that destruction, Peter performed one final act. He cut off one of his own fingers. The severed finger was left behind in the rubble as evidence that Peter Pettigrew had been killed in the explosion. To anyone investigating the scene later, it would appear that Sirius Black had murdered his former friend, along with the Muggles who had been caught in the blast, but Peter himself had already escaped. In the moment immediately after the explosion, he transformed into his animagus form. As a rat, he could slip unnoticed through the debris and disappear into the surrounding environment. The chaos of the destroyed street provided the perfect cover for his escape. By the time authorities arrived, Peter Pettigrew was gone. What remained behind told a very different story. Witnesses described seeing Sirius Black confront Pettigrew in anger. They recalled Peter's desperate accusations and the sudden explosion that followed. The discovery of the severed finger appeared to confirm the tragic conclusion that Peter had died during the attack. From the perspective of those investigating the scene, the explanation seemed clear. Sirius Black had betrayed the Potters to Voldemort, then murdered Peter Pettigrew to silence him. The explosion had also killed several innocent Muggles, creating a crime of enormous scale that demanded immediate punishment. Sirius himself did not attempt to escape when Ministry officials arrived. Instead, he reportedly laughed. The reaction shocked those present, reinforcing their belief that he had lost control completely. To them, his laughter seemed like the response of someone who understood the terrible crimes he had committed. Within hours, Sirius Black was taken into custody. The wizarding world quickly accepted the story that had been constructed around the event. Newspapers reported that Sirius had been responsible for the betrayal of the Potters. His connection to Voldemort was widely assumed, and the destruction of the street where Peter had supposedly died became further evidence of his guilt. Without a trial, Sirius Black was sent to Azkaban. Meanwhile, Peter Pettigrew remained hidden. His transformation into a rat allowed him to move through the world unnoticed. While the wizarding community mourned the deaths of James and Lily Potter and celebrated the apparent end of Voldemort's reign, the true traitor quietly disappeared into the shadows. The blame had fallen entirely upon Sirius Black, and the man responsible for the betrayal had successfully erased himself from the story. After the explosion in the street and the capture of Sirius Black, the wizarding world quickly accepted the explanation that had been placed before it. The story seemed clear enough. Sirius had betrayed James and Lily Potter, murdered Peter Pettigrew when confronted, and killed several muggles in the process. With Voldemort gone and one of his supposed followers imprisoned in Azkaban, many witches and wizards believed the worst of the war had finally ended. Yet the truth was very different. Peter Pettigrew had not died in that explosion. The severed finger left behind in the rubble had been nothing more than part of his escape plan. After transforming into his animagus form as a rat, he had slipped quietly away from the chaos of the destroyed street and vanished before anyone realized what had truly happened. From that moment onward, Peter Pettigrew began living a life of hiding. Remaining in his human form would have been far too dangerous. The wizarding world believed him dead, but if anyone recognized him alive, the entire story would collapse. Sirius Black's imprisonment would be questioned, and Peter himself would immediately become the most wanted wizard in Britain. The safest choice was to remain a rat. As an animagus, Peter could maintain that form indefinitely. The transformation required no constant magical effort once it had been mastered. In the body of a small animal, he could move unnoticed through places where humans rarely paid attention. For someone trying to disappear completely, the form was almost perfect. Rats existed everywhere in the wizarding world as well as the non-magical one. They lived in dark corners of buildings, beneath floorboards, inside walls, and along narrow passages where few people bothered to look. A small animal moving through those spaces attracted little notice. For a time after his escape, Peter likely survived exactly this way. He would have moved cautiously through sewers, abandoned buildings, and quiet countryside areas, avoiding both magical and non-magical attention. Food could be found easily enough for a creature his size, and the instincts of the rat form helped him navigate the hidden places where he remained safe. But living completely alone carried its own dangers. The wizarding world believed Peter Pettigrew was dead, yet the possibility that someone might eventually discover the truth still existed. Remaining close to magical society offered the advantage of hearing news about what was happening around him. If circumstances changed, he would need to know immediately. Eventually, Peter found a different kind of hiding place. He allowed himself to be discovered. At some point during his time in rat form, he came into the possession of a wizarding family who believed they had simply found an ordinary pet. The rat was passed from one child to another before finally reaching a young boy named Percy Weasley. The Weasley family lived in a tall, crooked house known as the Burrow, located in the countryside outside the village of Ottery St. Catchpole. They were a large family with several children, and pets were not unusual within their household. The rat, which Percy named Scabbers, quickly became part of the everyday life of the family. To everyone around him, Scabbers appeared completely ordinary. He slept in cages, scurried through pockets, and sometimes wandered freely through the rooms of the house. The children cared for him with the same casual affection given to any small animal kept as a pet. None of them suspected that the quiet rat in their home had once been a wizard deeply involved in the war against Voldemort. For Peter Pettigrew, the arrangement offered remarkable safety. Living as a pet within a wizarding household allowed him to remain close to the magical world without drawing suspicion. The Weasleys had no reason to question the presence of their son's rat. As long as Peter remained careful, he could observe the events unfolding around him while remaining effectively invisible. Years passed in this hidden life. When Percy Weasley eventually left Hogwarts and no longer needed his childhood pet, the rat was given to his younger brother Ron. Ron Weasley carried Scabbers with him when he travelled to Hogwarts as a first-year student, placing Peter Pettigrew once again within the castle where he had spent his youth. Returning to Hogwarts must have been a strange experience. The castle corridors, the moving staircases, and the familiar towers had once been the centre of his life as a student. Now he moved through them silently as a rat, avoiding the notice of teachers and students who had no reason to suspect the truth. The Marauder's map, the secret passages, and the memories of his old friendships all remained part of the castle's history. But Peter Pettigrew was no longer the young wizard who had helped create those things. He was a creature hiding in plain sight, surviving quietly within the pocket of a schoolboy. For nearly 12 years, this strange existence continued. The wizarding world slowly rebuilt itself after the fall of Voldemort. Children born after the war grew up hearing stories about the defeat of the Dark Lord and the mysterious survival of Harry Potter. Sirius Black remained imprisoned in Azkaban, widely believed to be the traitor responsible for the tragedy at Godric's Hollow, and Peter Pettigrew remained hidden. Day after day, he lived the quiet life of a rat named Scabbers, sleeping in dormitories, riding on Ron Weasley's shoulder, and listening to the conversations of students who never imagined that the small creature beside them carried one of the greatest secrets of the war. For more than a decade after the fall of Voldemort, Peter Pettigrew remained hidden in the small and unremarkable form of a rat named Scabbers. Within the Weasley household, he lived a life that appeared simple and harmless. The family saw him as nothing more than a slightly old and unusually quiet pet. To them, he was simply the rat that Percy Weasley had once owned and later passed down to his younger brother Ron. For Peter, the arrangement provided exactly what he needed. Remaining in the company of a wizarding family allowed him to stay close to magical society without attracting suspicion. At the same time, his animal form ensured that no one would ever connect him to the events that had taken place during the war. The wizarding world believed Peter Pettigrew had died years earlier in the explosion that had led to Sirius Black's imprisonment. As long as that belief remained unchallenged, he was safe. The Burrow, the home of the Weasley family, was a lively and crowded place. Arthur and Molly Weasley raised several children there, and the house was often filled with conversation, laughter, and the noise of everyday life. For a creature like Scabbers, it was easy to remain unnoticed amid such activity. Ron Weasley eventually brought the rat with him to Hogwarts when he began his own education at the school. This decision returned Peter Pettigrew to a place that had once been the center of his life. The castle at Hogwarts remained much as it had been during his years as a student. The same towers rose above the lake. The same corridors echoed with the voices of young witches and wizards, and the same professors continued teaching new generations of students. Yet Peter moved through this environment in a completely different way than before. As Scabbers, he spent most of his time inside Ron's pocket or cage, occasionally wandering through the Gryffindor dormitory or common room. Other students saw him only as a lazy and somewhat unhealthy-looking rat. No one paid attention to the creature beyond the occasional complaint about his age or behavior. For Peter, this life required constant caution. Even though the wizarding world believed him dead, certain individuals still knew what he had once been capable of. Albus Dumbledore remained alive, as did Remus Lupin. If either of them ever realized the truth about the rat living in the Gryffindor dormitory, Peter's years of hiding would come to an immediate end. Remaining in animal form protected him from most forms of magical detection. Animagus transformations were unique because they did not produce the magical signature associated with ordinary transfiguration. Once a wizard had fully mastered the ability, their animal form became a natural state rather than a temporary spell. This meant that Peter could move through the castle without appearing unusual to magical detection methods. Still, the castle contained many risks. Students practiced spells constantly, magical creatures occasionally wandered through the grounds, and professors sometimes used enchantments that might reveal hidden things. Peter had to remain alert, avoiding situations where he might accidentally reveal more intelligence or awareness than an ordinary rat possessed. The greatest irony of this hidden life lay in the presence of Harry Potter. When Harry arrived at Hogwarts for the first time, he entered the same Gryffindor house where Peter had once lived as a student. Harry quickly became close friends with Ron Weasley, which meant that Peter often found himself only a few feet away from the child whose life had been forever altered by his betrayal. Harry Potter was widely known throughout the wizarding world as the boy who lived. Students spoke about him constantly. They discussed the scar on his forehead, the mysterious night when Voldemort had disappeared, and the strange connection between the two. To most people, Harry represented hope that the dark days of the war would never return. Peter Pettigrew listened to those conversations quietly from inside Ron's pocket. The boy whose parents he had betrayed now walked the corridors of Hogwarts as a celebrated figure. Harry laughed with friends, attended classes, and played Quidditch on the same grounds where Peter had once spent his own youth. For Peter, the experience must have been deeply unsettling. Remaining close to Harry carried the constant reminder of what he had done. At the same time, it also allowed him to observe how the wizarding world had changed since the night of the betrayal. Years continued to pass in this strange, hidden existence. Scabbers became a familiar sight among the Gryffindor students. He appeared lazy, often sleeping through entire days without moving. Occasionally, he seemed nervous around certain individuals, but most people simply assumed that he was an old rat nearing the end of his life. The truth remained completely hidden. Peter Pettigrew, once a member of the Order of the Phoenix and a trusted friend of James Potter, had successfully erased himself from the history of the war. The wizarding world believed he had died a victim of Sirius Black's supposed crimes. And for 12 long years, the rat, living quietly beside Ron Weasley, continued to watch the lives of those around him, waiting and hoping that the past would never return to reveal the secret he carried. For many years after the fall of Voldemort, the wizarding world believed that the darkest part of the conflict had passed. The Order of the Phoenix slowly faded as its members returned to ordinary lives. The Ministry of Magic attempted to rebuild confidence among witches and wizards who had spent years living in fear. Children who had been born after the war grew up hearing stories about the defeat of the Dark Lord and the mysterious survival of Harry Potter. Yet one part of that story remained unresolved. Sirius Black had been imprisoned in Azkaban without a trial, accused of betraying James and Lily Potter and murdering Peter Pettigrew along with several muggles in a violent explosion. For more than a decade, he remained inside the prison, guarded by the terrifying creatures known as Dementors. Azkaban was designed to break the spirit of those confined within it. The Dementors that patrolled the prison fed on human happiness, draining prisoners of every pleasant memory until only despair remained. Many witches and wizards sent to Azkaban eventually lost the ability to think clearly or even remember why they had been imprisoned. But Sirius Black proved different. Though the years in Azkaban weakened his body, they did not destroy his mind in the way the Dementors expected. One thought remained clear throughout his imprisonment: Peter Pettigrew was still alive. Sirius had witnessed Peter's escape in the moments after the explosion in the street. He knew that the severed finger left behind had been part of a deception, yet the wizarding world believed Peter had died, and Sirius himself had been blamed for the crime. The knowledge that the real traitor remained free kept Sirius focused during those long years in the prison. Eventually, a small piece of information reached him that changed everything. A newspaper article, brought into Azkaban by the prison guards, contained a photograph showing the Weasley family during a visit to Egypt. The image was ordinary enough, displaying Arthur Weasley and his children smiling in the bright sunlight. But Sirius noticed something others would never have recognized. On Ron Weasley's shoulder sat a rat. The animal appeared small and unremarkable to anyone unfamiliar with its true nature. But Sirius had spent years with Peter Pettigrew during their time at Hogwarts. He knew Peter's animagus form as well as he knew his human face. The rat in the photograph was Peter. For the first time in 12 years, Sirius understood exactly where the traitor had been hiding. That realization gave him something the Dementors could not take away: purpose. Unlike most prisoners in Azkaban, Sirius retained the ability to transform into his animagus form. As a large black dog, he could move past the Dementors more easily because their power affected animals differently than humans. His transformation allowed him to slip past the guards and escape the prison in a way that no one had previously believed possible. When news of his escape spread through the wizarding world, panic followed. Sirius Black was widely believed to be one of Voldemort's most dangerous supporters. The idea that he had escaped from Azkaban created immediate fear. The Ministry of Magic launched a massive search, sending auras across the country in an attempt to capture him. Meanwhile, Sirius had already begun moving toward Hogwarts. He knew that Ron Weasley was a student there, which meant that Peter Pettigrew was likely living inside the castle disguised as the rat named Scabbers. The thought that the man responsible for James and Lily's deaths had been hiding quietly among students for years filled Sirius with determination. At Hogwarts, rumors about Sirius Black's escape spread quickly. Students whispered about the dangerous prisoner who had broken out of Azkaban. Professors increased security around the castle, and Dementors were stationed along the grounds to prevent Sirius from approaching. For Peter Pettigrew, the situation was terrifying. From the safety of Ron Weasley's pocket, he listened to the conversations describing Sirius's escape. He knew immediately what it meant. If Sirius reached Hogwarts and revealed the truth, Peter's years of hiding would end instantly. The rat who had lived quietly among the students suddenly found himself in great danger. Peter attempted to remain calm, continuing to behave like an ordinary pet. But the tension around the castle grew stronger each day. Dementors patrolled the grounds, professors watched the corridors carefully, and rumors about Sirius Black filled every conversation. To most people at Hogwarts, the escaped prisoner represented a mysterious threat. Only two individuals truly understood what Sirius Black had come to find. One was Sirius himself. The other was the rat hiding quietly beside Ron Weasley, waiting anxiously for the moment when the past would finally catch up with him. As the school year continued under the shadow of Sirius Black's escape, tension inside Hogwarts grew steadily stronger. Dementors patrolled the grounds surrounding the castle, and the Ministry of Magic had placed strict security measures in place. Students were warned not to wander alone, and the staff remained constantly alert for any sign that the escaped prisoner might attempt to enter the school. For most people inside Hogwarts, Sirius Black represented a dangerous criminal searching for Harry Potter. Only a few individuals understood that the situation was far more complicated. Peter Pettigrew certainly understood. Hidden in the form of Ron Weasley's rat, he had been living in quiet safety for more than a decade. Now the sudden appearance of Sirius Black threatened everything he had built during those years of hiding. Peter knew exactly why Sirius had come to Hogwarts. Sirius knew the truth. From the moment the photograph in the newspaper revealed Peter's location, Sirius had been determined to confront the man responsible for the betrayal of the Potters. For him, the castle represented the one place where Peter Pettigrew could not remain hidden forever. Throughout the year, several strange events began to occur around the school. At times, Ron Weasley believed he saw something moving in the dormitory at night. On other occasions, the rat named Scabbers behaved in unusual ways, appearing nervous and desperate to escape from situations that would normally not disturb an ordinary animal. Ron and his friends often assumed that the strange behavior was caused by fear of the Dementors or the general tension surrounding Sirius Black's escape. But the truth was much simpler. Peter Pettigrew knew that the person hunting him was drawing closer. Eventually, events brought everything together on a single night near the end of the school year. Harry Potter, Ron Weasley, and Hermione Granger had followed a chain of circumstances that led them toward the Whomping Willow, the violent tree that stood on the grounds of Hogwarts. Beneath the roots of that tree lay the secret tunnel that led to the Shrieking Shack, the same building that had once served as the safe location for Remus Lupin's transformations during his years as a student. During the confusion surrounding these events, Ron was pulled into the tunnel, with Harry and Hermione following close behind. Hidden among them was Peter Pettigrew. Still in the form of Scabbers, He was carried along into the tunnel that he himself had once used during his school years as part of the Marauders' secret adventures. Inside the Shrieking Shack, the past finally caught up with him. Sirius Black appeared in the room, confronting the students and revealing that he had not come to harm Harry Potter at all. Instead, his true goal was to capture the person responsible for betraying James and Lily Potter. The moment carried enormous confusion for Harry, Ron, and Hermione. Everything they had heard about Sirius suggested that he was a murderer who had betrayed Harry's parents. Yet Sirius insisted that the real traitor was someone else entirely. Remus Lupin soon arrived as well, now a professor at Hogwarts. Lupin had already begun suspecting the truth after examining the Marauders' map. The enchanted parchment revealed every person inside the castle, including one name that should not have existed: Peter Pettigrew. Inside the shack, Lupin and Sirius finally explained the full story to the stunned students. Sirius had never betrayed the Potters. The secret of their location had been entrusted to Peter Pettigrew, and Peter had revealed that information to Voldemort. The explosion in the street had been a deception, designed to frame Sirius for the crime, while Peter escaped in his animagus form. To prove the truth, they forced the rat named Scabbers to transform back into his human shape. The change revealed the frightened figure of Peter Pettigrew. For the first time in 12 years, the Wizarding World's most carefully hidden traitor stood exposed. Peter appeared weak and desperate, his small frame trembling as he faced the 3 students and the 2 men who had once been his closest friends. He immediately began pleading for mercy. Peter claimed that he had acted out of fear, insisting that Voldemort's power had made resistance impossible. He begged Sirius and Lupin to spare his life, arguing that he had never intended for events to unfold as they had. But the truth was clear. James and Lily Potter had died because Peter Pettigrew had chosen to betray them. Sirius and Lupin initially agreed that Peter should be killed for what he had done. Yet, Harry Potter, standing in the room where the truth had finally emerged, made a different decision. Harry believed that killing Peter would not bring justice for his parents. Instead, he insisted that Peter should be turned over to the authorities so the truth about Sirius Black could finally be revealed. Reluctantly, Sirius and Lupin agreed. For a brief moment, it seemed as though the long deception had finally come to an end. Peter Pettigrew would face the consequences of his betrayal, and Sirius Black's innocence would be proven. But the night was not yet finished. Events outside the shack were already moving toward another unexpected turn, one that would allow Peter Pettigrew to escape once again before the truth could be brought fully into the light. After the truth about Peter Pettigrew had been revealed inside the Shrieking Shack, the situation seemed, for a brief moment, to be moving toward justice. Sirius Black and Remus Lupin stood beside Harry Potter, Ron Weasley, and Hermione Granger as they prepared to bring Peter back to Hogwarts. Once there, the story of the betrayal would be told openly, and the long misunderstanding that had placed Sirius in Azkaban would finally be corrected. Peter Pettigrew, however, had no intention of allowing that to happen. Bound and frightened, he continued begging for mercy as they prepared to leave the shack. His voice trembled with desperation as he repeated the same claims he had made moments earlier. He insisted that fear had driven his choices, that Voldemort's power had been too great to resist. Each word was spoken with the hope that someone might feel sympathy for his situation, but the others remained focused on the task ahead. If Peter could be delivered safely to the authorities, Sirius Black's innocence would finally be proven. The Wizarding World would learn the truth about what had happened on the night the Potters died. For Sirius and Lupin, the possibility of correcting that terrible injustice felt closer than it had in many years. They began the journey back through the tunnel beneath the Whomping Willow. The passage leading from the Shrieking Shack toward the castle was narrow and dark, winding beneath the roots of the violent tree that guarded its entrance. The group moved carefully through the tunnel, keeping Peter tightly under control as they walked. Yet the night outside carried a danger none of them had fully considered. Remus Lupin had been so focused on the events unfolding inside the shack that he had forgotten something critical. That night happened to coincide with the full moon. Lupin was a werewolf, and when the moon rose, he would transform. Normally, he relied on a potion that allowed him to retain his human mind during the transformation, but the potion had not been taken that evening. The sudden confrontation with Sirius and Peter had interrupted the routine he followed each month to remain safe. As they emerged from the tunnel beneath the Whomping Willow, the moonlight revealed the terrible truth. Remus Lupin began to transform. The change happened quickly. His body shifted violently as the curse of lycanthropy took control, and within moments the man who had once been a calm professor stood replaced by a dangerous werewolf. The situation descended into chaos. Sirius Black immediately transformed into his animagus form, the large black dog known as Padfoot, attempting to distract the werewolf and protect the others. Harry, Ron, and Hermione struggled to move away from the violent confrontation unfolding before them. In the middle of that confusion, Peter Pettigrew saw his chance. The moment Sirius and Lupin were no longer watching him closely, Peter slipped free from his restraints. With the same desperate instinct that had guided his earlier escape years before, he transformed back into his animagus form. The small rat named Scabbers returned. Before anyone could react, the rat darted away into the darkness. The confusion caused by the werewolf transformation made it impossible for the others to follow him immediately. By the time the danger had passed and Lupin's transformation had been contained, Peter Pettigrew had already disappeared. Once again, he had escaped. The consequences of that escape were enormous. Without Peter present to confirm the truth, Sirius Black remained officially guilty in the eyes of the wizarding world. The Ministry of Magic had no evidence to prove that Peter had survived the explosion years earlier, and the story told by Harry and his friends was difficult for authorities to accept without the traitor himself standing before them. Sirius, still considered a criminal by the Ministry, was forced to flee once again to avoid being captured. Meanwhile, Peter Pettigrew had vanished into the wider world. This time, however, he could not return to the quiet life he had once lived as Ron Weasley's pet rat. Too many people now knew that he was alive. Sirius Black was free, and Remus Lupin understood the truth as well. Remaining near Hogwarts, or within the homes of wizarding families, was no longer safe. Peter needed to find someone who could protect him. There was only one person in the world who might offer that protection: Lord Voldemort. Though Voldemort's body had been destroyed on the night he attacked the Potters, rumors had always suggested that he had not completely vanished. Some believed that a fragment of his existence remained somewhere, waiting for the opportunity to return. For Peter Pettigrew, finding that fragment became the only path forward. The man who had betrayed his friends now fled into the darkness once again, searching for the fallen master whose power he had once feared so deeply. And in doing so, he would soon play a crucial role in bringing Voldemort back into the wizarding world. After escaping from the chaos outside the Shrieking Shack, Peter Pettigrew disappeared once again into the wider wizarding world. The opportunity that had saved him came at the last possible moment. If Remus Lupin had not transformed into a werewolf that night, Peter would almost certainly have been delivered to the authorities and forced to answer for the betrayal that had shaped the entire course of the war. Instead, he was free again. But this time his situation was very different from the years he had spent hiding as Ron Weasley's pet. The secret of his survival was no longer completely hidden. Sirius Black knew the truth. Remus Lupin knew it as well. Harry Potter and his friends had witnessed the transformation that revealed Peter's identity. Even if the Ministry of Magic refused to accept their story, the number of people aware that Peter Pettigrew still lived had grown dangerously large. Returning to the life of a quiet rat inside a wizarding household was no longer possible. Peter needed protection. There was only one source of protection powerful enough to keep him safe from the consequences of his actions. Though Voldemort's physical body had been destroyed many years earlier, Peter believed that the Dark Lord had not truly vanished. He began searching for him. The process was not easy. Voldemort had been reduced to a shadow of his former self after the failed attack on Harry Potter. Without a physical body, he had been forced into a strange and fragile existence. surviving only by clinging to life through dark magic that very few people understood. Most of the wizarding world assumed that Voldemort was gone forever, but Peter Pettigrew believed otherwise. Moving quietly through forests and remote villages, often traveling in his rat form to avoid detection, Peter followed rumors and fragments of information about strange magical disturbances. His journey eventually brought him to a distant and isolated forest in Albania. It was there that he found what remained of the Dark Lord. Voldemort existed as little more than a shadowy presence, unable to move freely or command the power he once possessed. His survival had been made possible through dark magic that allowed his spirit to remain in the world despite the destruction of his body. Yet in that state he was weak, dependent on others for even the simplest forms of assistance. Peter Pettigrew became that assistance. When he discovered Voldemort's hidden existence, Peter quickly pledged his loyalty once again. The decision was driven by the same fear that had shaped his earlier choices during the war. Serving Voldemort seemed safer than facing the consequences of betrayal alone. Voldemort accepted Peter's loyalty without hesitation. Though his physical power had been greatly reduced, the Dark Lord still possessed a brilliant and calculating mind. He understood that Peter Pettigrew's return offered an important opportunity. With the help of a loyal servant, Voldemort could begin taking steps toward restoring his strength. The first stage of that process involved survival. Peter cared for Voldemort during the months that followed, performing whatever tasks were necessary to keep the weakened Dark Lord hidden and protected. Food had to be obtained, shelter maintained, and magical preparations made for the complicated ritual that Voldemort believed could eventually restore his physical form. During this time, another unexpected development occurred. A former Death Eater named Barty Crouch Jr., who had secretly escaped imprisonment years earlier, managed to find his way back to Voldemort as well. With the help of both Peter Pettigrew and Barty Crouch Jr., the Dark Lord began planning a strategy that would allow him to return to power without revealing his presence too early. The plan centered around Harry Potter. Voldemort believed that Harry's blood contained the magical protection that had once destroyed his body. If that blood could be used in a ritual to restore Voldemort's form, the protection created by Lily Potter's sacrifice might be overcome. For Peter Pettigrew, this plan meant that his role in Voldemort's return would become far more significant. He was no longer simply a servant hiding in the shadows. The Dark Lord now relied on him to perform important tasks that would prepare the way for the next stage of the plan. Peter obeyed these commands eagerly, hoping that his loyalty would protect him from Voldemort's anger over the failure that had occurred years earlier. The first step involved capturing Harry Potter. Through a complicated chain of events involving the Triwizard Tournament at Hogwarts, Voldemort's followers arranged for Harry to be transported away from the school at the exact moment when the final stage of the ritual could be performed. When the plan finally succeeded, Harry Potter found himself standing in a graveyard far from Hogwarts. Waiting for him were Peter Pettigrew and the weakened form of Voldemort. For the second time in his life, Peter Pettigrew now stood directly beside the Dark Lord during a moment that would shape the future of the wizarding world. The frightened boy who had once betrayed his friends had become the servant responsible for helping Voldemort rise again. The graveyard at Little Hangleton was quiet when Harry Potter arrived there through the Triwizard Cup, which had secretly been transformed into a portkey. The competition at Hogwarts had ended only moments earlier, and Harry had expected the cup to return him to the school grounds. Instead, the sudden pull of the portkey carried him far away into darkness. When the disorientation faded, he found himself standing among rows of old gravestones. Waiting nearby were two figures. One of them was Peter Pettigrew. The years had changed him little. He still appeared small and nervous, his movements quick and restless. Yet the role he now played in the events unfolding around him was far more significant than it had ever been during his years of hiding. In his arms, Peter carried a strange and fragile object. It was the weakened form of Lord Voldemort. The Dark Lord still lacked a true human body, existing only as a small, twisted creature sustained by dark magic. Unable to move or act on his own, Voldemort depended entirely on Peter Pettigrew for protection and assistance. Harry was quickly overpowered and bound. Peter moved with nervous urgency as he secured Harry to the gravestone belonging to Tom Riddle Sr., Voldemort's father. The graveyard had been chosen carefully. It was remote, quiet, and connected to Voldemort's own family history. Everything had been prepared in advance. The ritual Voldemort intended to perform required several specific elements. Each ingredient represented a connection to the Dark Lord's past, present, and future. Peter Pettigrew began the process. Following Voldemort's instructions, he carried the weakened creature to a large stone cauldron that had been placed in the graveyard earlier. The cauldron was filled with a potion whose exact composition involved powerful and dangerous magic. The first ingredient came from the bones of Voldemort's father. Peter approached the nearby grave and carefully collected the remains needed for the ritual. When he dropped the bones into the potion, the liquid within the cauldron reacted immediately, glowing and shifting as the spell continued to unfold. Next came the flesh of the servant. This part of the ritual required a sacrifice. Without hesitation, Peter Pettigrew raised his wand and cut off his own hand. The pain must have been immense, yet he completed the act with desperate determination. The severed hand fell into the potion, and the liquid once again responded, growing brighter and more violent as the ritual progressed. For Peter, the sacrifice was not only an act of obedience, it was also proof of loyalty. The man who had betrayed his friends years earlier now demonstrated his devotion to Voldemort in a far more physical way. By offering a part of his own body, he hoped to ensure that the Dark Lord would see him as a faithful servant rather than a coward who had once failed. The final ingredient required blood from the enemy. Peter approached Harry Potter with a knife and cut his arm, collecting the blood needed for the potion. As the blood entered the cauldron, the magical reaction reached its final stage. The potion began to boil violently. Peter lifted the small and fragile form of Voldemort and lowered it carefully into the cauldron. For a moment, everything fell silent as the dark magic completed its work. Then the potion erupted. From the swirling liquid, a new figure began to rise. Slowly, the shape of a human body formed within the mist. When the figure stepped out of the cauldron, Lord Voldemort had returned. His new body appeared pale and snake-like, with red eyes and a face that reflected the unnatural magic used in the ritual. Though different from his previous appearance, the Dark Lord once again possessed a physical form capable of wielding powerful magic. Peter Pettigrew collapsed nearby, weakened from the loss of his hand. But Voldemort did not forget his servant's sacrifice. Using magic, he created a new silver hand for Peter, replacing the one that had been lost during the ritual. The replacement moved like a living part of Peter's body, granting him the ability to continue serving his master. With his strength restored, Voldemort immediately summoned his followers. Death Eaters began arriving in the graveyard, called by the dark mark that burned upon their arms. Many of them had believed their master destroyed years earlier. Now they knelt before him once again, shocked and fearful as they witnessed his return. Peter Pettigrew stood among them. The frightened student who had once followed stronger friends at Hogwarts had now helped restore the most feared dark wizard in history. His choices had carried him from quiet betrayal to direct involvement in the rebirth of Voldemort's power. The ritual in the graveyard marked a turning point. Voldemort was no longer a shadow hiding in distant forests. With Peter Pettigrew's help, he had regained a body and begun gathering the followers who would help him rebuild his strength. And once again, Peter stood at the center of events that would soon reshape the wizarding world. After the ritual in the graveyard at Little Hangleton, Lord Voldemort once again possessed a body and the ability to command his followers directly. The moment marked the true beginning of his return to power. Death Eaters, who had spent years hiding or pretending loyalty to the Ministry of Magic, now gathered around their master once again. Peter Pettigrew stood among them. The silver hand Voldemort had created for him gleamed faintly in the darkness of the graveyard. It moved with unnatural precision, obeying his thoughts as though it had always been part of his body. For Peter, the hand represented both a reward and a reminder. His sacrifice had helped bring Voldemort back, and the Dark Lord had chosen to acknowledge that loyalty. But loyalty to Voldemort rarely meant safety. Peter's position among the Death Eaters remained uncertain. Many of Voldemort's followers remembered him from the earlier war, when his reputation had been that of a nervous and insignificant wizard who survived by attaching himself to stronger allies. They did not respect him in the way they respected more powerful or confident servants. Yet Voldemort valued usefulness above all else. Peter had proven useful. He had discovered Voldemort in the forests of Albania, cared for him during his weakened state, and carried out the ritual that restored his body. Without Peter's help, Voldemort's return might have taken far longer, or perhaps never happened at all. Because of this, Voldemort kept Peter close. During the early stages of rebuilding his power, the Dark Lord relied on secrecy. The wizarding world believed that Voldemort had been destroyed years earlier, and many officials at the Ministry of Magic refused to accept that he had returned. This disbelief allowed Voldemort to move quietly, gathering allies and preparing his next steps. Peter Pettigrew became part of those preparations. He served as a messenger and assistant, carrying out tasks that required loyalty rather than great magical skill. His willingness to obey without question made him valuable in situations where Voldemort needed servants who would not hesitate. At the same time, Peter lived in constant fear. Voldemort's anger was unpredictable, and failure could bring severe punishment. The Dark Lord expected absolute obedience from those who served him. Peter understood that the protection he had gained by helping restore Voldemort could vanish instantly if he disappointed his master. This fear shaped his behavior. Whenever Voldemort spoke, Peter listened carefully and obeyed immediately. He rarely questioned orders and avoided drawing attention to himself unless specifically commanded. His goal remained the same as it had always been: survival. Meanwhile, the wizarding world slowly began to realize that something had changed. Though the Ministry of Magic initially refused to accept reports of Voldemort's return, strange events began occurring across Britain. Dark wizards who had once served Voldemort started disappearing from their quiet lives. Unexplained attacks took place in isolated locations, leaving behind signs of dark magic. Members of the Order of the Phoenix, which Albus Dumbledore had begun rebuilding, recognized these events for what they were. Voldemort was gathering strength again. Within this growing conflict, Peter Pettigrew continued serving the Dark Lord in the background. His tasks often involved assisting more powerful Death Eaters or maintaining communication between Voldemort and his followers. Though he lacked the skill or authority of others in the group, his loyalty remained unquestioned. One of the most significant developments during this time involved the return of Voldemort's influence inside the ministry itself. Through secrecy, manipulation, and fear, Voldemort gradually began placing supporters within positions of authority. These changes allowed him to operate with increasing freedom, while the ministry struggled to recognize the danger growing within its own structure. Peter witnessed these changes from his place among the Death Eaters. The world he had helped shape through betrayal was slowly returning to the darkness that had once dominated it. The war that many people believed had ended was quietly beginning again. For Peter, there was no turning back. His choices had tied his fate permanently to Voldemort's rise. The frightened boy who had once followed stronger friends at Hogwarts had become a servant of the most feared wizard in history. Each action he took now helped strengthen the movement that would soon challenge the entire wizarding world once more. And though he remained a small figure among Voldemort's followers, Peter Pettigrew continued to play his part in the unfolding events that would lead toward the final stages of the conflict. As Lord Voldemort's power continued to grow once again, the group of followers surrounding him slowly expanded. Death Eaters who had spent years pretending loyalty to the ministry returned to serve him openly in secret meetings. Some came willingly, eager to reclaim the influence they had once held during the earlier war. Others returned out of fear, knowing that refusing the Dark Lord could lead to consequences far worse than obedience. Among them stood Peter Pettigrew. He rarely attracted attention within the group. Many of the Death Eaters had been powerful witches and wizards long before Voldemort's fall, and they carried themselves with confidence and pride. Peter, by contrast, remained nervous and cautious, often staying slightly behind the others during gatherings. Yet his presence among them remained significant. Voldemort remembered that Peter had played an essential role in restoring his body. Without the ritual performed in the graveyard at Little Hangleton, the Dark Lord might still have been hiding as a weak and wandering spirit. The silver hand Voldemort had given Peter served as a permanent reminder of that service. The hand itself possessed unusual properties. Though it appeared metallic and cold, it moved with perfect precision, responding instantly to Peter's thoughts. It allowed him to perform ordinary tasks with ease, but it also carried a darker purpose. Voldemort had designed it not only as a reward, but also as a form of control. The hand was bound by magic to its creator. This connection meant that Peter's continued survival depended entirely on Voldemort's favor. The gift that replaced his lost hand also ensured that any act of disloyalty would have immediate consequences. For Peter, this knowledge deepened the fear that had always guided his decisions. As Voldemort's influence spread through the wizarding world, Peter found himself participating in operations designed to weaken the resistance forming against the Dark Lord. The Order of the Phoenix, led by Albus Dumbledore, had begun gathering witches and wizards willing to oppose Voldemort's return. This opposition threatened the Dark Lord's plans. Peter sometimes assisted in smaller tasks that supported the larger campaign. He carried messages between Death Eaters, helped maintain hidden meeting places, and performed whatever duties Voldemort assigned. Though he lacked the power to lead attacks or command others, his loyalty ensured that he remained useful. At times, he also encountered other servants who had joined Voldemort more recently. Some of them treated him with quiet suspicion. They knew the story of how he had betrayed the Potters years earlier, and while that act had helped Voldemort, it also revealed the kind of person Peter was. Among Death Eaters, loyalty was valued, but betrayal was never fully trusted. Peter understood this tension. He had survived by aligning himself with whoever appeared strongest at the moment. That strategy had once led him to betray his closest friends. Now it required him to demonstrate constant devotion to Voldemort in order to remain protected. The second rise of the Dark Lord brought increasing danger to the wizarding world. Attacks began occurring more frequently. Witches and wizards who opposed Voldemort disappeared under mysterious circumstances. The Ministry of Magic struggled to respond effectively, especially as some of its own officials secretly supported the Dark Lord's cause. Peter witnessed these developments from within the ranks of Voldemort's followers. Though he had once been a minor participant in the earlier war, he now found himself involved in the renewed conflict that spread across magical society. Each action taken by Voldemort and the Death Eaters pushed the world closer to open confrontation. Despite the growing chaos, Peter remained the same person he had always been. Fear continued to guide his decisions. The power surrounding Voldemort kept him obedient, while the memory of his earlier betrayal reminded him that returning to the other side was no longer possible. Too many lives had already been shaped by the choices he had made. The silver hand on his arm served as a constant reminder of that truth. Every movement of the metal fingers carried the weight of the ritual performed in the graveyard. It symbolized both his loyalty to Voldemort and the irreversible path he had taken. And as the war began to spread once more through the wizarding world, Peter Pettigrew remained exactly where his choices had placed him, standing quietly among the servants of the Dark Lord, helping shape events that would soon lead toward the final confrontation between Voldemort and those who resisted him. As Voldemort's influence continued spreading through the wizarding world, his followers became more active in carrying out plans designed to weaken resistance. The Order of the Phoenix worked quietly to oppose these efforts, while the Ministry of Magic struggled to understand the true scale of the danger growing around them. Within this increasingly dangerous world, Peter Pettigrew remained one of Voldemort's most obedient servants. His position among the Death Eaters had never been based on strength or leadership. Instead, it depended on his willingness to follow orders without hesitation. Voldemort valued this obedience, especially in situations where careful secrecy was required. During these years of renewed conflict, Voldemort focused much of his attention on one particular goal. Harry Potter, the boy who had survived the attack in Godric's Hollow, remained the central obstacle in Voldemort's plans. Though Voldemort had regained his body and rebuilt his network of followers, he continued to view Harry as a threat connected to the prophecy that had shaped his earlier actions. Because of this, many of Voldemort's strategies involved monitoring Harry's movements. Peter Pettigrew occasionally found himself involved in these efforts. While he lacked the authority of more powerful Death Eaters, he could still assist in maintaining communication or preparing locations where Voldemort's plans might unfold. Throughout this time, the war between Voldemort's followers and the Order of the Phoenix slowly intensified. Attacks became more frequent. Magical communities across Britain began living with the same fear that had once dominated the earlier war. Families worried about the safety of their homes, and rumors about Death Eater activity spread through wizarding towns and villages. Peter watched these developments with quiet unease. Although he had helped restore Voldemort to power, the reality of the conflict around him remained frightening. The war brought unpredictable consequences, and the loyalty he offered Voldemort did not guarantee that he would always remain safe. The silver hand given to him after the ritual in the graveyard served as a constant reminder of that uncertainty. It moved like a natural part of his body, but the magic that created it tied Peter's fate directly to Voldemort's will. The hand symbolized both reward and control. As long as Peter remained loyal, it functioned perfectly. But any sign of betrayal could change that balance instantly. Despite these fears, Peter continued carrying out his duties. One of the places where his role became particularly important was Malfoy Manor. The large and imposing house belonging to the Malfoy family had become one of the central locations where Voldemort and his followers gathered during the renewed war. Peter often remained there as a servant and assistant. His tasks included maintaining security, delivering messages, and performing whatever duties were required to support Voldemort's operations. Though the work placed him near some of the most dangerous individuals in the wizarding world, Peter obeyed each instruction carefully. Life inside the manor reflected the darker atmosphere that had begun spreading through magical society. Meetings between Death Eaters took place frequently, with Voldemort issuing commands that shaped the growing conflict. Prisoners captured by the Dark Lord's followers were sometimes brought to the manor for interrogation or punishment. Peter witnessed many of these events quietly from the background. He rarely spoke unless necessary, preferring to remain unnoticed whenever possible. His instinct for survival encouraged him to avoid attention while still fulfilling the tasks assigned to him. During this time, the search for Harry Potter remained one of Voldemort's highest priorities. The Dark Lord believed that defeating Harry personally would remove the final obstacle standing between him and complete control of the wizarding world. Because of this belief, Voldemort continued sending followers across Britain in attempts to locate Harry and capture him. Peter understood the importance of this goal. The boy whose parents he had betrayed years earlier had become the central figure in the conflict that now consumed the wizarding world. The choices Peter had made long ago had helped create the circumstances that allowed Voldemort to return. Now those same choices placed him firmly within the circle of servants working to bring the war to its final stage. As the months passed and the conflict intensified, the events unfolding across magical Britain moved steadily toward a confrontation that would determine the future of the wizarding world. And within the dark halls of Malfoy Manor, Peter Pettigrew continued performing his duties quietly, waiting for the moment when the struggle between Voldemort and Harry Potter would finally reach its conclusion. During the final stages of the war, Malfoy Manor had become one of the most important locations under Voldemort's control. The large house served as a gathering place for Death Eaters and as a temporary prison for individuals captured during the conflict. Many of the Dark Lord's followers passed through its halls while carrying out the orders that spread fear across the wizarding world. Peter Pettigrew remained there as well. His role inside the manor was not one of leadership or power. Instead, he acted as a servant who carried out whatever tasks were assigned to him. The years he had spent surviving through obedience had taught him that remaining useful was the safest position he could hold. By this point, the war had reached an intense stage. Harry Potter and his closest allies were moving through the wizarding world in secret, searching for the hidden objects known as Horcruxes that sustained Voldemort's life. Though Voldemort did not yet fully understand what they were doing, the growing resistance against him had begun to create problems that required constant attention. At Malfoy Manor, Voldemort's followers waited for any opportunity to capture Harry. One evening, that opportunity seemed to arrive unexpectedly. A group of prisoners was brought to the manor after being captured by Snatchers, a band of bounty hunters who searched for people traveling without proper identification during the war. Among the prisoners were several individuals whose names were known to the Death Eaters. Harry Potter had been captured. Alongside him were Ron Weasley, Hermione Granger, and others who had been traveling with them. The prisoners were brought into the manor while the Death Eaters debated whether the captured boy was truly Harry. Peter Pettigrew was assigned the task of guarding them. The responsibility placed him directly in the path of the people whose lives had once been shaped by his betrayal. Ron Weasley stood only a few feet away from the man who had spent years living secretly as his pet rat. Harry Potter, the child whose parents had died because of Peter's actions, was now once again within reach. Peter attempted to perform his duty with the same nervous obedience that had guided him for years. He kept watch over the prisoners as events unfolded elsewhere in the house. Hermione Granger was taken away for questioning, while the others remained bound and guarded in a cellar beneath the manor. During this time, something unexpected happened. Harry Potter spoke directly to Peter. He reminded him of the moment years earlier in the Shrieking Shack, when Harry had chosen not to allow Sirius Black and Remus Lupin to kill him. Harry had insisted that Peter should live and face justice, rather than being murdered for his betrayal. The memory of that decision had remained with Peter. For a brief moment, the frightened wizard hesitated. The silver hand Voldemort had given him suddenly reacted in a way Peter had never experienced before. The magical bond connecting the hand to Voldemort recognized the hesitation as a sign of weakness. In that instant, the gift Voldemort had given him revealed its darker purpose. The hand tightened around Peter's own throat. At first, the pressure was slight, as though warning him that his loyalty was being questioned. But as Peter continued hesitating, the grip became stronger. The silver fingers closed around his neck with increasing force, responding to the magic that Voldemort had built into them. Peter struggled to pull the hand away. The metal fingers did not release their grip. The same hand that had been given to him as a reward for loyalty now acted as an instrument of punishment. Voldemort had ensured that any moment of betrayal would bring immediate consequences. Within moments, the pressure around Peter's throat became impossible to resist. He collapsed to the floor, unable to breathe as the enchanted hand completed its task. The servant who had helped restore Voldemort's body, who had betrayed his friends and shaped the course of the war, died in the cellar of Malfoy Manor. His death happened quietly. The war continued around the house as the prisoners found ways to escape, and the conflict between Voldemort's followers and their enemies moved toward its final stage. But Peter Pettigrew's story had reached its end. The frightened boy, who had once followed stronger friends through the corridors of Hogwarts, had spent his life searching for protection through loyalty to power. In the end, the very gift that symbolized that loyalty became the cause of his death. Peter Pettigrew's life ended quietly in the cellar of Malfoy Manor, far from the school where his story had first begun. The war continued beyond the walls of that house, moving rapidly toward the final confrontation that would take place at Hogwarts. Yet the man who had played such an important role in shaping the conflict was no longer present to witness how it ended. His death marked the closing chapter of a life defined by fear, loyalty, and betrayal. From the beginning, Peter Pettigrew had rarely acted with confidence. During his years as a student at Hogwarts, he had surrounded himself with friends who possessed qualities he believed he lacked. James Potter was brave and talented, Sirius Black was bold and rebellious, and Remus Lupin carried a quiet strength that allowed him to endure hardships few others understood. Peter followed them closely. Their friendship had been genuine, yet it had also created a dynamic in which Peter relied heavily on the courage of others. When danger approached, he looked for protection among those who appeared stronger. This pattern continued long after their school years ended. When Voldemort rose to power during the First Wizarding War, Peter faced a choice that many witches and wizards encountered during that time. Some joined the resistance, risking their lives to oppose the Dark Lord. Others chose obedience or cooperation, believing that survival required submission to Voldemort's growing influence. Peter chose cooperation. Fear guided that decision. The power Voldemort displayed frightened many people, but for Peter the fear became overwhelming. Instead of trusting the friends who had stood beside him for years, he chose the path that seemed safest in the moment. The betrayal of the Potters followed. As the secret keeper under the Fidelius charm, Peter held the knowledge that protected James and Lily from Voldemort's search. By revealing that secret, he set in motion the events that led to their deaths and to Voldemort's first defeat. Afterward, Peter devoted his life to hiding from the consequences of that choice. For 12 years he lived as a rat named Scabbers, quietly observing the world from the pocket of a schoolboy. During that time, the wizarding world believed him dead, and Sirius Black guilty of the crime Peter himself had committed. Even when the truth finally emerged, Peter's instinct remained the same. He escaped again, searching for the one person whose power he believed could still protect him. Finding Voldemort in the forests of Albania allowed Peter to secure that protection, but it also bound him permanently to the Dark Lord's cause. The ritual that restored Voldemort's body demonstrated just how far Peter had traveled from the frightened student he once was. Cutting off his own hand to complete the spell showed his willingness to sacrifice anything for the chance to remain under the Dark Lord's protection. In return, he received the Silver Hand that later became both symbol and instrument of Voldemort's control. That control eventually ended his life. When Peter hesitated in the cellar of Malfoy Manor, the magic embedded in the Silver Hand responded immediately. The brief moment of uncertainty was enough to trigger the punishment Voldemort had prepared long before. In the end, Peter Pettigrew died as he had lived. His story was shaped by fear and by the belief that survival depended on attaching himself to greater power. Yet, that strategy carried a terrible cost. The betrayal of his friends destroyed the trust that had once defined his life, leaving him isolated among people who never truly respected him. Even the master he served saw him only as a tool. When that tool faltered, it was discarded without hesitation. The wizarding world moved forward after the war ended. Voldemort would soon face his final defeat, and many of the events that shaped that conflict would become part of magical history. But the quiet story of Peter Pettigrew remained a reminder of how ordinary choices, made out of fear rather than courage, can ripple outward to affect countless lives. And in the long history of the wizarding world, his name would forever remain connected to one of the most tragic betrayals it had ever known. The life of Peter Pettigrew moved quietly through many of the most important moments in the history of the wizarding world. He was present during the friendship of the Marauders at Hogwarts, during the first rise of Lord Voldemort, and during the events that eventually brought the Dark Lord back into power. Yet his story was rarely defined by strength or leadership. Instead, it followed the choices of someone who spent most of his life searching for safety. Those choices shaped the lives of many others. A secret revealed out of fear led to the deaths of James and Lily Potter. Years of hiding delayed the truth and placed an innocent man in prison. Later, the same instinct for survival helped restore Voldemort's body and reignite a war that would spread once again across the wizarding world. In the end, Peter Pettigrew's story reminds us that history is not shaped only by heroes and powerful figures. Sometimes it is also shaped by quiet decisions made in moments of fear, by individuals who believe they are simply trying to survive. And as the world continued moving forward after the war, the memory of Peter Pettigrew remained as a quiet example of how the smallest choices can echo through history for many years to come.